Hi everybody. Tonight I invite you to embark on a journey unlike any other, a quiet, shadowed walk into a world most only hear about in whispers. Our story will take us far beyond the crumbling facades of ancient Sicilian villages, beyond the veil of rumour and myth, into the hidden secrets inside the Sicilian Mafia. But this is not a tale of action or violence. Instead, it is a slow unravelling of centuries-old bonds, secret brotherhoods, silent pacts, and quiet betrayals. A story that, like soft footsteps on a stone alley, echoes gently in the heart of the night. Imagine with me, if you will, the soft orange glow of lamplight spilling onto a narrow Sicilian street in the late hours. The air is cool, carrying with it the faint scent of sea salt and lemon blossoms. Behind shuttered windows, ancient voices murmur stories passed down through generations, stories no court has ever proven, no book ever truly recorded. In this stillness begins our exploration, one thread at a time, into a labyrinth woven with loyalty, fear, and the soft rustle of hidden power. Our tale begins not with a notorious name or a famous crime, but with a boy born beneath the golden Sicilian sun in the quiet hamlet of Corleone. His name was Matteo, a name lost to history, for he was never a boss, never a killer, never a man of legend. He was instead a silent witness, a thread woven through the secret tapestry of Cosa Nostra's most hidden chapters. Matteo was born into a family of simple farmers, men and women who bent their backs to the stubborn Sicilian earth, coaxing from it olives, lemons, and the sharp, dark wine of the region. His father Antonio was a man of few words, his eyes shadowed by the hard lessons of peasant life. But within Antonio, beneath the skin hardened by sun and toil, ran a bloodline touched by silent power, one that stretched back to the earliest days of the Brotherhood. It was said, though never allowed, that Antonio's grandfather had been a man of honour. And though time had worn away the sharp edges of that story, the whispers remained, a silent currency exchanged in furtive glances and knowing nods at village gatherings. Matteo grew in the quiet space between this world and the world of the ordinary, a child who sensed more than he understood. On his 12th birthday, the village elder, Don Ernesto, came to their home. Don Ernesto was a name few dared to speak openly, a man whose presence alone seemed to lower voices and quicken hearts. Yet he came not as a master to a servant, but as a friend to the family. He sat at their wooden table, drinking black coffee thick as oil, his ringed hand resting gently on the worn wood. He spoke softly to Antonio, words Matteo could barely hear, though the tone wrapped around the boy's curiosity like a net. No promises were asked, no favours exchanged, only a quiet conversation that left his father's eyes darker than before. And then, before leaving, Don Ernesto placed a hand on Matteo's shoulder, a touch so light, so brief, and yet it set the boy's heart beating like a drum. That night, beneath a sky crowded with stars, Antonio spoke words that seemed as old as Sicily itself. Words of silence, of family, of loyalty, a strange education, whispered not as a warning but as a legacy. He spoke of men who moved like shadows, who wielded influence without raising their voices. Men who settled debts not in gold or silver, but in respect and silence. Matteo listened, not understanding fully, but feeling the weight of something vast pressing gently upon his young shoulders. It was the beginning of a silent inheritance, a legacy whispered through the marrow of generations. There were no initiations, no blood rites, not for him, not yet. Only an awakening, as soft and steady as the Sicilian tide. Over the next few years, Matteo began to notice what others seemed to ignore. The way certain men, quiet, ordinary men, commanded the deference of the most powerful in town. The way a baker's debt vanished after a quiet conversation. The way justice moved in the village, not through courts, but through soft words exchanged behind shuttered doors. He saw how men who crossed unseen lines disappeared into the silence of the night, not with violence, but with quiet exile, erased not by bullets, but by memory itself. They were forgotten, their names fading like footprints in wet sand. And in this world of soft power and silent influence, Matteo walked as an observer, a ghost among shadows. Yet there was nothing sinister in these early impressions, no cruelty, no dark purpose. It was rather a world of balance, of favours given and owed, of unseen hands keeping fragile peace in a land forgotten by governments and kings. It was a quiet order in a noisy world. One autumn evening, as the sun set in a wash of crimson over the olive groves, Matteo met Giulio, a man barely past 30, with eyes sharp as glass and a voice as soft as velvet. Giulio was known as an accountant, a harmless man with ink-stained fingers, but the truth whispered otherwise. Giulio taught Matteo about silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of wisdom. A man, Giulio once told him, is judged not by the words he speaks, but by the words he swallows. In Giulio's presence, Matteo learned the language of glances, the weight of pauses, the meaning hidden in a shared nod across a crowded square. Slowly, Matteo began to understand. The Mafia, the Cosa Nostra, was not merely a gang of criminals, nor a brotherhood of thugs. It was a quiet, living force, woven into the very soil of Sicily. It moved like wind between the cracks of the world, unseen but deeply felt. A silent court dispensing its own form of justice, balancing debts in a world where laws bent to the highest bidder. Yet even within this quiet order, secrets lay coiled like sleeping serpents. Secrets Matteo could sense but not yet see. He felt the slow pull of them, like a deep current beneath calm waters. And as he grew into a man, those secrets would begin to stir, casting long shadows over his quiet Sicilian life. But for now, under the soft gaze of the Sicilian moon, Matteo remained the silent witness, the quiet keeper of the first, hidden chapter in a story far darker and deeper than he could ever imagine. The years drifted softly by, like the hush of the Mediterranean breeze weaving its way through the lemon groves of Corleone. Matteo grew, his limbs lengthening with the quiet grace of a tree stretching toward the sun. Yet, even as his body changed, the world around him seemed to remain wrapped in the same delicate silence, a hush that carried both peace and unseen weight. By the time he turned 16, Matteo had become something of a familiar shadow in the village streets. He spoke little, watched much, and moved always with an air of respectful stillness. The farmers greeted him with brief nods, the shopkeepers with faint smiles. But more often than not, it was in the silent spaces between those nods and smiles where Matteo felt the hidden life of his village breathe, a quiet pulse, steady and unseen. It was during that quiet summer of his 16th year when Matteo found himself drawn deeper into Giulio's world. The accountant, ever calm, ever understated, had taken a liking to the boy. Their meetings began as casual lessons, sums, ledgers, the art of reading contracts with a sharp eye for the invisible ink between the lines. But beneath these lessons there lay an unspoken education, a quiet shaping of the mind and heart. One humid evening, with the scent of orange blossoms thick on the air, Giulio invited Matteo to accompany him to a gathering outside the village. The location was a modest farmhouse, its whitewashed walls gleaming softly in the moonlight. As they approached, Matteo noticed men gathered on the porch, men he recognized, though not as friends or neighbors. These were men whose names were rarely spoken aloud, whose faces seemed to blend into the folds of whispered stories. Inside, the house was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp resting on a wooden table. Around it sat 4 men, each older than Giulio, their eyes marked by the kind of quiet gravity Matteo had only ever seen in his father on storm-heavy days. They greeted Giulio with faint nods, no words, no handshakes. The air in the room was not tense, but heavy with a certain unspoken understanding. Giulio placed a hand on Matteo's shoulder, guiding him gently forward. The men studied the boy in silence, their gazes sharp but not unkind. And then, after a long pause, one of them, a man with silver streaking his dark hair, spoke softly. "This is the boy?" Giulio nodded once. "He listens." No further explanation was given. None was needed. The meeting that night was not one of grand conspiracies or whispered plots. It was instead a gathering of quiet discussions, talk of land disputes, of family quarrels needing soft resolution, of debts that weighed heavier than money. Matteo sat in a corner, silent, his heart beating slow but strong. What struck him most was the way these men spoke, not as lords or tyrants, but as caretakers of a fragile balance. They did not command, they guided. They did not threaten, they advised. And beneath every soft-spoken word lay a deep reservoir of authority, felt but never flaunted. The Mafia, Matteo realized in those hushed hours, was not built on fear alone. It was built on necessity, a silent pact between a people abandoned by the state and men who stepped quietly into that void. As the meeting ended, the silver-haired man turned to Matteo once more. His eyes, dark and unreadable, lingered on the boy's face for a moment before he spoke. "Remember this, ragazzo," he said softly. Power is not in the hand that strikes, but in the hand that restrains. A man of honor holds peace in one hand and silence in the other. Matteo bowed his head, the words sinking into him with a weight he could scarcely explain. From that night forward, Giulio brought Matteo deeper into the quiet workings of the unseen world. There were no oaths, no whispered vows of allegiance, only tasks, small at first. A message delivered with a careful word, a letter carried to a neighbouring village, a ledger checked twice to ensure all numbers whispered the same truth. With each task, Matteo began to understand more fully the delicate web that stretched across Sicily. It was a network not of force, but of favours, of debts woven with threads of trust and fear in equal measure. A baker in Palermo who needed protection from a corrupt official, a farmer in Trapani whose land was threatened by a greedy landlord, and always the silent balancing hand of men like Giulio, moving gently, almost invisibly. Yet even in this world of soft power, there were shadows deeper still, whispers of the unseen hands that even Giulio spoke of with lowered eyes. The council, some called it. The commission, said others. A gathering of men so deeply buried within the folds of society that their names were not even known to those they ruled. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled softly over the hills, Giulio spoke to Matteo of this unseen power. There are men, he said quietly, who do not sit at tables in farmhouses, men whose words cross oceans, whose reach extends beyond kings and parliaments. We do not speak their names, Matteo. We do not seek them. We only serve the balance they demand. Matteo felt a chill then, not of fear but of awe. The world he had known, the small world of Corleone's silent pacts, was but a single thread in a vast shadowed tapestry. That night, lying awake in his narrow bed beneath the thatched roof of his family's farmhouse, Matteo felt the slow turning of destiny's wheel. The Mafia was no mere brotherhood of outlaws. It was a silent empire, built not on violence alone, but on understanding the quiet depths of human need, fear and loyalty. And Matteo, quiet, observant Matteo, was drifting deeper into its silent heart. As dawn broke soft and golden over the Sicilian hills, he knew that his life had shifted in ways too subtle for words. The silent inheritance of his family's blood was awakening, not with a shout, but with a whisper that would echo through every shadowed step he would take from this day forward. The summer of Matteo's 17th year arrived with a gentle hush, the kind of quiet heat that settled over the hills of Corleone like a silken veil. The days stretched long, golden and soft, but beneath that tranquil beauty, the hidden currents of the world Matteo had entered began to flow deeper and swifter. Giulio's presence in his life grew ever more constant, though their interactions remained curiously understated. They met in quiet corners of the village, by the old stone fountain, beneath the arching branches of the olive grove, or in the shade alcove behind the church where the scent of incense still lingered in the air. Always their words came softly, exchanged in tones that would hardly ruffle a sparrow's wing. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the vineyards in a drowsy glow, Giulio placed in Matteo's hand a sealed envelope, plain, unmarked, its contents known only to its sender and intended recipient. The task was simple, yet heavy with silent implication. Matteo was to deliver it to a man named Don Salvatore, a name that travelled in whispers through the southern valleys. Don Salvatore was no common figure in Sicilian law. His name was wrapped in a strange reverence, like a prayer half-spoken. He was said to be a man who dealt not with violence, but with the unseen, broker of peace between feuding families, arbiter of disputes that courts dared not touch. But there were darker murmurs too, of debts collected in bloodless ways, of men who disappeared without struggle, their fates tied to Don Salvatore's quiet decrees. Matteo found the Don at a villa nestled on the edge of Monreale, a place swathed in ancient cypress trees and the faint hum of bees among lavender fields. The villa itself bore no signs of grandeur, no guards, no gates, only the timeless weight of Sicilian stone and shadow. Don Salvatore was waiting in the courtyard, seated beneath the heavy branches of a fig tree. He was a man of indeterminate age, his hair dark but streaked with grey, his eyes soft yet impossibly deep. When Matteo approached, the Don offered a nod, a simple tilt of the head that felt like a silent benediction. "You have something for me?" he asked, his voice smooth as aged wine. Matteo extended the envelope with both hands, bowing his head slightly in respect. Salvatore accepted it, setting it gently on the stone table beside him without so much as a glance. His eyes instead studied Matteo, calm, searching, as though reading the pages of a book invisible to all others. "You are Antonio's son," Salvatore observed quietly. "Yes, Don Salvatore." There was a pause, a breath of silence between them that seemed to stretch and settle like the soft fall of dusk. "Your father was a wise man," the Don said at last. He understood that in Sicily, the wind itself carries messages. Some speak loudly, others carry the weight of silence. It is the silent winds that move mountains. Matteo felt the words anchor within him, settling deep into places he did not know could hold such weight. Salvatore leaned back in his chair, his gaze softening just slightly. "Do you know why you're here, ragazzo?" Matteo hesitated, measuring his response with care, to deliver a message. The faintest smile touched the corners of the Don's mouth. "More than that," he said gently. "You are here to listen, to see, and perhaps to begin to understand that in our world, every step, every silent act carries a ripple. The Mafia is not a creature of violence, but a keeper of balance. Those who do not grasp this, they fade." The words hung in the air like a soft mist. Without warning, Salvatore's hand moved, a slow, graceful motion as he picked up the envelope and slid it into his coat pocket. "Tell Giulio," he said softly, "that the balance will hold for now." Matteo bowed once more, his heart steady, his mind swirling with questions left unspoken. As he made his way back through the winding hills, the soft murmurs of the land seemed to echo Salvatore's words. "The balance will hold." The phrase repeated itself in his mind like a quiet refrain, its meaning elusive but strangely comforting. Over the weeks that followed, Matteo continued his quiet work. The tasks grew more intricate, a shipment of supplies sent with discreet discretion, a message relayed through a chain of silent men, a quiet observation shared in the right ear at the right time. Each step carried with it no overt danger, no flashing violence. And yet beneath each action lay an undercurrent of invisible consequence. He learned through Giulio's careful guidance the importance of timing. A word whispered too soon could ignite a feud, while a glance withheld at the right moment could settle it. The Mafia was, in every sense, a silent orchestra where each man played a note only when the unseen conductor's hands signalled, and those who played out of tune seldom played again. It was during this quiet apprenticeship that Matteo first heard whispers of La Cupola, the fabled commission Giulio had once spoken of with such hushed reverence. Men spoke of it as one might speak of a distant storm, a presence felt in the shifting winds, in the sudden silences at village gatherings, in the unexpected resolutions of old disputes. It was said that La Cupola was not a gathering of men, but a single will, a shared mind that watched, weighed, and decided the fate of Sicily's silent empire. But for all the whispers, no one claimed to have seen it. No one named its members. It existed, it seemed, more as a living rumour than a tangible council, and yet its influence was undeniable. One night, as a soft rain pattered on the roof of Giulio's modest study, Matteo dared to ask, "Is La Cupola real?" Giulio looked up from his ledgers, his eyes reflecting the dim candlelight. "It is as real as the silence between heartbeats," he said quietly. "You may never see it, you may never hear its name spoken, but you will know its presence, in the quiet shifts of power, in the sudden calm after storms that should have raged." He set his pen down, folding his hands with a calm born of long understanding. "And if you are wise, Matteo, you will learn not to seek it, but to listen for it." That night, as the rain fell in soft whispers, Matteo lay awake in his narrow bed, staring at the beams of the ceiling. He felt the deep hum of the world around him, a world where every word, every silence, every unseen act moved like a thread in a vast, shadowed tapestry. He understood now that he was no mere observer. Slowly, gently, he was becoming a part of it. A living thread in the quiet, hidden heart of Sicily. The autumn winds arrived soft and low, brushing gently through the golden vineyards of Corleone and carrying with them the scent of ripened figs and distant wood smoke. Matteo, now on the cusp of manhood, moved through this season with a calm that belied his years. His days remained wrapped in the quiet simplicity of village life, working beside his father in the fields, sharing quiet meals at the family table. But within him stirred a silent awakening, a sense that each passing moment was guiding him ever deeper into an unseen world. One early morning, as the mist still clung to the hills, Giulio summoned him with a simple message. Come to Palermo. It was the first time Giulio had called him beyond the familiar borders of Corleone. The words carried no explanation, no urgency, only an invitation that felt more like a summons. Palermo, the heart of Sicily, pulsed with a life far different from the quiet rhythms of the countryside. Its narrow streets wound like ancient veins through neighborhoods both grand and crumbling, where the scent of sea air mingled with the rich aroma of baking bread and the faint perfume of citrus groves. To Matteo, it felt as though the very stones of the city whispered secrets beneath his feet. Giulio met him at a small cafe tucked away in the shadow of La Cala port, a place where fishermen's boats rocked gently against the docks and the world seemed to hold its breath beneath a soft Sicilian sun. Giulio's manner was calm as always, his voice low, his words measured. Today you will see the other face of our world, he said softly, stirring his black coffee with deliberate slowness. The face that smiles, that wears fine suits, that walks openly among men, and yet speaks only in silence. Matteo nodded, though a quiet unease stirred within him. He had imagined the underworld of Sicily as a realm of shadows and whispered commands. He had not expected its reach into the sunlit streets of Palermo. Their destination was a bank, an elegant building of marble and polished brass, standing like a monument to order and prosperity. Inside, men in fine suits moved with quiet confidence, their voices hushed, their gestures restrained. Matteo followed Giulio through the grand hall to a private office at the back, where a man named Signor Vittorio awaited them. Vittorio was a banker by title, but as Giulio later explained in soft tones, his true role was far more delicate. He was the silent steward of wealth that moved beneath the surface of Sicily's economy, money that flowed without records, investments made without signatures, debts settled with glances rather than contracts. Vittorio greeted Giulio with a handshake that spoke volumes in its simplicity. When his eyes met Matteo's, there was a brief, silent pause, one that seemed to measure, to weigh, to judge. "This is the boy?" Vittorio asked, his voice calm but edged with a faint curiosity. Giulio gave a single nod. "He listens." Vittorio offered Matteo a faint smile, thin, enigmatic. "Good," the banker said softly. "Listening is the beginning of understanding, and the end of many dangers." For the better part of the morning, Matteo sat quietly as Giulio and Vittorio discussed matters that flowed like soft streams of water. Businesses quietly shifting hands, debts paid not in coin but in favors, investments moved across borders without a single word written on paper. It was a world Matteo could scarcely have imagined. A world where power flowed not through brute force, but through silent influence woven with the precision of a master's hand. Yet beneath this quiet commerce, Matteo sensed something deeper, an undercurrent of control so subtle it defied words. The Mafia, he realized, was not simply a brotherhood of men protecting their own. It was a silent hand guiding the fortunes of Sicily itself. Money, influence, politics, all bound by the soft, unseen threads of whispered agreements and invisible debts. When the meeting ended, Vittorio turned once more to Matteo. "Power," the banker said, his voice low, "is not in wealth itself, but in knowing where wealth will flow, in guiding it gently as a shepherd guides his flock." Matteo absorbed the words, their quiet truth settling deep within him. As they left the bank and stepped into the soft warmth of the afternoon sun, Giulio spoke softly by his side. "You see, Matteo, there are many faces in our world. Some hold knives, others hold ledgers, but all are bound by the same silent code." Matteo walked in silence, the weight of what he had seen pressing gently upon his heart. That evening, as the sun bled crimson over the rooftops of Palermo, Giulio brought him to a small trattoria nestled on a quiet street. There, beneath the soft lamplight, sat three men, unknown to Matteo, yet somehow familiar in their bearing. They greeted Giulio with soft nods, and one motioned for Matteo to sit. The conversation that followed was unlike any Matteo had heard before. They spoke of politics, of elections not yet announced, of officials not yet in power. They spoke of business ventures that would span oceans, of ships that would sail under flags not yet hoisted. And though their voices remained soft, their words carried the weight of decisions already made. Matteo understood, in that hushed hour, that the Mafia's power was not in the streets alone. It reached into boardrooms, into parliament chambers, into the hearts of cities and the hands of kings, and it moved always in silence. As the men rose to leave, one placed a hand briefly on Matteo's shoulder, a simple gesture, yet heavy with unspoken meaning. "Observe, learn, and remember," the man said softly. "The loudest man in the room is often the weakest." That night, as Matteo lay awake in a small rented room above the trattoria, the city murmuring softly beneath his window, he felt the threads of his life weaving tighter into a tapestry he could scarcely yet understand. He thought of his father's quiet strength, of Don Salvatore's measured gaze, of Vittorio's subtle power, and of Giulio's soft guidance. They were all part of something vast, something ancient, an empire of silence that moved unseen beneath the skin of Sicily. And Matteo was no longer a mere observer. He was becoming a part of it. The chill of Sicilian winter settled gently over the hills, laying a thin veil of frost upon the vineyards and olive groves. In the quiet streets of Corleone, fires burned low in hearths, casting soft amber glows behind shuttered windows. It was a season when the land seemed to hold its breath, wrapped in a hush deeper than silence itself. For Matteo, this winter marked the beginning of a subtle transformation, a shift as quiet and steady as the turning of the earth beneath his feet. His journeys to Palermo became more frequent, each trip a quiet thread weaving him deeper into the intricate tapestry of silent influence. Yet for all his growing awareness, Matteo still remained on the periphery, a trusted observer, a silent courier, a young man whose name carried no weight beyond whispered recognition. It was during one such winter evening that Giulio summoned him with a simple request. There were no grand instructions, no whispered warnings, only this: come to Montelepre. The village of Montelepre lay draped along the hills west of Palermo, its streets narrow and winding, its walls steeped in the quiet echoes of forgotten centuries. Matteo arrived beneath a low sky, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp stone. He found Giulio waiting outside a modest chapel on the edge of the village, an old structure, its whitewashed walls weathered by time and rain. Giulio greeted him with a quiet nod and said only, "Tonight you will meet a man who holds no title, yet commands the loyalty of many." They entered the chapel together, their footsteps hushed against the worn stone floor. Inside, by the flickering glow of a single candle, stood a man unlike any Matteo had yet encountered. His name was Cesare. He was neither old nor young, perhaps in his 40s, with a face carved by both laughter and loss. His dark eyes held the quiet weight of a man who had seen too much yet spoke of it seldom. Cesare greeted Giulio with a soft handshake, and when his gaze met Matteo's, there was no scrutiny, no testing, only a calm, steady regard. "So this is the boy," Cesare said, his voice soft, carrying the faint lilt of Palermo's western dialect. Giulio simply nodded. Cesare turned his attention fully to Matteo then. "You know the names of many men, I'm sure," he said gently. "But names are just wind. What matters is what a man carries and what he leaves behind." Matteo inclined his head respectfully. "I understand." A faint smile touched Cesare's lips. "Do you?" For a long, quiet moment, the three stood in the silent chapel, the candle's flame swaying gently in the unseen draughts. Then, without further preamble, Cesare began to speak, not of himself, but of the heart of the Brotherhood. "There are many who think of us as thieves, as killers, as criminals hiding behind soft words and polite gestures, and perhaps, in some eyes, they are right. But the truth of Cosa Nostra runs deeper than gold, deeper than power, deeper than fear." His voice remained soft, yet each word settled into the air like a quiet stone cast into a still pond. "We are the guardians of a trust that no government ever earned. In Sicily, laws come and go, kings rise and fall, but the word of a man that lives beyond the grave." Matteo listened, every part of him attuned to the weight of those quiet words. Cesare stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Matteo's. "We do not rule by fear alone. Fear is a tool. Respect, trust, silence. Those are the roots. You must understand this, Matteo. The greatest secret of our world is that it exists not because of violence, but in spite of it." He placed a hand gently on Matteo's shoulder, a gesture not of command, but of solemnity. "Men follow us because they know that when the world turns its back on them, we do not. They come to us for justice when courts offer none. They seek our help when governments turn away. And for this, they repay us with loyalty deeper than blood." There was a pause, a soft, sacred hush. "But loyalty is a fragile thing," Cesare continued quietly. "It must be tended like the olive tree. It takes years to grow, and a single careless act to destroy." Matteo felt those words root themselves within him, deeper than any lesson Giulio had ever taught. That evening they spoke not of business, nor of secret dealings. They spoke of honor, of the invisible code that bound men like Cesare and Giulio in a bond unbreakable by sword or gold. It was a quiet education, delivered not with sermons but with gentle truths wrapped in simple words. When they parted, Cesare offered Matteo a final thought. "Remember, ragazzo, a man's silence is worth more than his oath. The world will try to make you speak when you should stay silent, and stay silent when you should speak. Know the difference, and you will walk this path with your head high." As Matteo walked back through the darkened streets of Montelepre, the words echoed softly within him. He realized then that his journey was not just one of silent tasks and whispered messages. It was a quiet forging of the heart, a slow, steady moulding into something both sharper and softer than he had ever imagined. In the months that followed, Matteo returned to Montelepre often, not as a courier, nor as an errand boy, but as a quiet companion to Cesare. They spoke of many things, of Sicily's old legends, of the land's unbroken spirit, of the men who shaped its hidden history. And with each passing day, Matteo's understanding deepened. The Mafia was not a single man. It was not a single family. It was not even a single cause. It was a living memory, a silent agreement between the forgotten and the remembered, the powerless and the protectors, the betrayed and the faithful. In its heart was a simple truth, one that Cesare whispered to him beneath the shadowed boughs of the olive grove on a soft winter night. Honor is the only crown worth wearing, and it must be worn in silence. As the first soft snows began to fall over the hills of Sicily, Matteo stood upon the threshold of something vast and unseen. No oath had been sworn, no rite had been performed, and yet in the quiet chambers of his heart he felt it, a silent belonging, deeper than words. The early whispers of spring stirred softly through the Sicilian hills, carrying with them the scent of damp earth and the faint promise of new life. In Corleone, the fields awoke beneath tender rains, and the air grew heavy with the fragrance of blossoming almond trees. Life resumed its quiet rhythm, unhurried and steady, as though the land itself moved to a heartbeat older than time. For Matteo, the season unfolded with a new weight of understanding. His time with Cesare in Montelepre had left a quiet imprint upon his soul, a mark unseen but deeply felt. He moved now through the familiar streets of his village with a silent confidence, an awareness that extended beyond the simple gaze of a farmer's son. The world he glimpsed no longer lived in shadows, but hovered gently beneath the surface of every word, every glance, every softly exchanged favor. One crisp morning, as the mist lifted slowly from the valleys, Matteo received word from Giulio, not a letter, nor a whispered message through a trusted voice, but a simple coin, placed upon the stone wall near the well in Corleone's square. It was a small copper coin, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. Yet Matteo understood at once. It was an invitation. He found Giulio waiting at the edge of the forest beyond the village, leaning quietly against an ancient olive tree whose gnarled roots gripped the earth like silent hands. There were no words of greeting, no questions asked. Giulio merely motioned for him to walk beside him along a narrow path leading deep into the woods. They moved in silence for a time, the soft crunch of leaves beneath their boots the only sound. When Giulio finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper, as though carried on the hush of the wind itself. "There comes a time," he began, "when a man must decide what kind of silence he will carry." Matteo listened, his heart steady, though curiosity stirred within him. Giulio glanced at him with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You have seen much, heard more, and yet you have spoken little. That is why you are here." They emerged from the woods into a small clearing where a circle of stones marked a place both ancient and sacred. It was not a chapel, nor a meeting hall, but something older, a simple space where the earth met the sky without walls or roof. And within that space stood 4 men. Matteo recognized none of them, yet each bore the quiet gravity of those who moved unseen, but whose presence shaped the world. They greeted Giulio with soft nods, their eyes turning to Matteo with expressions neither cold nor welcoming, merely observing. Giulio motioned for Matteo to step forward. "This is the boy," he said softly. One of the men, his face weathered by sun and time, spoke in a voice low and even. "Has he chosen?" Giulio gave a slow nod. "He chooses by standing here." A hush followed, thick but not oppressive. It was a silence filled with unseen meanings, with the weight of things left unsaid. The eldest among them stepped forward, his eyes dark as the roots of the mountain. "You stand here not for a vow," he said gently, "but for a choice. There are paths before you, Matteo. One is the life of the land, the honest work of your father's hands. The other is the silent road we walk, a path of balance, of service, of unseen burdens." He studied Matteo with a gaze that felt like the soft pressure of the earth itself. "You have been brought here because you have listened. You have kept faith without oath, loyalty without demand. But before you stand fully upon this road, you must understand, once you walk it, there is no turning back." Matteo met the man's eyes, the weight of the moment settling upon him like the soft fall of dusk. "I understand," Matteo said quietly. The man nodded once, a simple, profound motion. "You will not swear, you will not pledge, you will carry this in silence." One by one, the men placed a hand briefly upon Matteo's shoulder, a touch as light as the passing breeze. No words were exchanged, no symbols drawn, and yet in that quiet ritual Matteo felt the silent bond weave itself gently around him, a belonging forged not in fire, but in trust. When they departed, leaving him alone with Giulio beneath the soft hush of swaying branches, Matteo felt neither burden nor fear, only a deep, steady calm. As they walked back toward the village, Giulio spoke once more. "You have chosen the path of the silent ones," he said softly. "You will not be a soldier, nor a boss, nor a king. You will be a man of balance, a keeper of peace in a world that knows none." Matteo absorbed the words, their quiet resonance echoing within him. That evening, as he sat beside his father in the fading light of their farmhouse, Antonio spoke softly without lifting his gaze from the fire. "The men you walk with now, they carry a legacy older than kings. But remember, Matteo, honor is not given by them. It must be kept by you." Matteo nodded, understanding more deeply than words could express. The days that followed were marked not by grand acts or whispered orders, but by small, quiet deeds. A word of counsel offered to a troubled neighbor, a silent message passed to a man seeking fairness, a glance exchanged that settled a dispute before it began. Matteo became, without fanfare, a quiet thread within the fabric of his village, a presence felt more than seen. The old men at the square offered him silent nods. The merchants shared brief, knowing glances. Even the restless youth of Corleone treated him with a quiet deference they could not explain. And Matteo moved among them all with a calm heart and steady step. In the soft unfolding of spring, he understood that he was no longer merely a boy beneath the Sicilian sun. He had become a silent guardian of a world hidden beneath the surface, a quiet bearer of a legacy that would live not in songs nor in the pages of history, but in the unspoken heart of Sicily itself. The summer sun rose slow and golden over the hills of Corleone, casting long, soft shadows across the vineyards and stone walls. Life moved with a languid grace, as though the world itself had learned the art of quiet patience. And within this hush, Matteo's steps grew surer, his presence deeper, woven gently into the silent currents that guided the unseen heart of Sicily. It was in the fullness of that summer when Giulio once more called upon him, not with a whispered message nor a silent gesture, but with a quiet invitation spoken beneath the shade of an old fig tree in the village square. "There is a man in Trapani," Giulio said, his voice calm as always, "who carries a burden he should not carry alone." Matteo met his mentor's gaze, waiting, listening. Giulio's eyes held a flicker of something beyond their usual calm, a shadow of thought, a ripple beneath the surface. "His name is Alberto. He is not one of us, but he is a man who has known our protection, and now he stands at a crossroads." The task, though simple in words, carried a weight Matteo felt deeply. He was to travel alone to Trapani, a city of fishermen and traders perched on the western coast, where the salt air mingled with the scent of spices brought by ancient ships. There he would find Alberto, listen to his troubles, and help. No promises, no expectations. only a quiet readiness to serve the balance that bound their hidden world. Matteo journeyed westward at dawn, his path winding through sun-dappled groves and silent hills. The land stretched wide and hushed, the sea shimmering faintly in the distance like a silent sentinel. As he travelled, Matteo felt the soft hum of the unseen web that connected every village, every man bound by silent loyalties and unseen debts. Trapani welcomed him with a soft sea breeze and the quiet murmur of the marketplace. The harbour bustled, yet beneath its noise lay the same silent rhythm Matteo had learned to recognise, the undercurrent of glances exchanged, debts settled with a nod, disputes avoided with a wordless understanding. He found Alberto in a small workshop tucked away from the crowded streets, a craftsman of fine wooden boats, his hands marked by years of labour, his eyes shadowed by unspoken worries. Alberto greeted Matteo with the wary courtesy of a man unused to visitors from distant places. Yet at the mention of Giulio's name, the craftsman's shoulders softened, his eyes shifting with a flicker of relief. They spoke quietly over black coffee brewed thick and strong. Alberto's story unfolded slowly, like the careful shaping of wood beneath steady hands. A local official, greedy, ruthless, had demanded tribute for protection. An old story in Sicily, worn thin by time yet ever sharp. But Alberto, trusting in the silent protection of men like Giulio, had refused. And now the threats had grown quieter, more dangerous. Matteo listened without interruption, his presence as calm and steady as the sea breeze drifting through the open window. When Alberto finished, there was no plea, no request, only a silent look, heavy with the unspoken hope that the boy before him carried more than just a name. Matteo nodded once. I will speak with him. It was not bravado, not a promise of swift justice, only a quiet acceptance of the unseen duty he had begun to bear. The official, Signor Leone, was a man known for his polished charm and cold heart. Matteo found him in a shaded courtyard behind a merchant's villa, his laughter soft, his smile practiced. At first glance, Leone seemed every bit the respectable man, a patron of trade, a pillar of the community. But Matteo had learned to look beyond faces. He approached with quiet steps, his greeting polite, his demeanour respectful. And yet, beneath every word, there was a steady presence, a calm that spoke of silent knowledge. Leone regarded him with a faint smile, curiosity flickering behind his eyes. You are far from home, ragazzo, he said lightly. Corleone is a quiet place. What brings you to the noise of Trapani? Matteo met his gaze with soft steadiness. A friend of a friend. Ask me to listen. Leone's smile held for a moment longer, then softened into something cooler. And what have you heard? Matteo let the question settle in the air, the silence stretching between them like a quiet thread. I heard, Matteo said gently, that peace is a delicate thing, and that in Sicily, those who disturb it seldom sleep well. The words were soft, not a threat, not a challenge, only a simple truth, spoken with the weight of unseen hands behind them. Leone's eyes held his for a long moment. Then, as slowly as the soft roll of a wave, the man's smile faded into something quieter, something almost respectful. Peace, Leone echoed, his voice lower now. Yes, it is delicate. Matteo offered a faint nod, said nothing more. By dusk, Alberto's troubles had quieted, not through confrontation, not through violence, but through the silent understanding that sometimes passed between men in Sicily when the right words were spoken by the right messenger. When Matteo returned to Corleone, Giulio greeted him with a quiet glance, a faint nod. Nothing more was said of Trapani. Nothing needed to be. In that silent exchange, Matteo felt a deeper shift within himself, a settling, like a stone coming gently to rest at the bottom of a clear, still pond. He understood now that his role was not to wield power, but to carry its presence, a quiet force that moved not through fear, but through respect and silent expectation. That summer, Matteo became something more than a silent observer. He became a keeper of the quiet threads that held Sicily's fragile balance in place, and the world around him began to notice. The late summer sun cast its soft amber glow over Corleone's stone walls and the winding paths that led from vineyard to village. It was a season of quiet ripeness, when the land seemed to exhale in slow contentment, its fruits heavy on the branches, its skies brushed with the pale gold of approaching autumn. Life in the village moved with an ease that belied the unseen tensions humming gently beneath its surface, a balance carefully tended by men like Giulio, by silent watchers like Matteo. It was on one such tranquil evening that a rider came quietly into the village, a man Matteo had never seen before, his face drawn, his clothing simple, though his eyes carried the unmistakable weight of a hidden purpose. The man spoke to no one, lingered only long enough at the square's old fountain to drink, then left a folded piece of parchment atop the stone rim before walking away. Matteo retrieved it without hurry, as though reaching for nothing more than a loose thread of cloth. He unfolded the paper beneath the soft wash of sunset and read the single line written in careful, precise script. "Meet me at the old mill. Midnight." There was no signature. There needed to be none. The old mill stood beyond the northern edge of Corleone, where the hills dipped into a quiet hollow and the wind sang low among the cypress trees. Matteo arrived before midnight, the moon high and veiled by drifting clouds, the air thick with the sense of damp earth and wild thyme. The mill's wooden frame loomed silent against the night sky, its wheel long stilled by time. Within its shadows waited Cesare. The older man emerged from the darkness with the quiet ease of a man accustomed to blending into silence itself. His presence brought no unease, only a soft awareness that something of quiet importance was about to unfold. "You came," Cesare said softly, a faint smile at the corner of his lips. Matteo nodded. "I listen." Cesare gave a small, approving tilt of his head, stepping forward into the dim wash of moonlight. "There is a man in Palermo," he began, his voice carrying the soft cadence of a whispered tale. "A merchant, respected by many, feared by a few. His name is Raimondo." The name settled in the air like a soft ripple. Matteo had heard it before, a name passed in hushed tones, wrapped in faint rumors of silent power. Raimondo was said to control much of Palermo's trade, his influence extending through the docks, the markets, the quiet rooms where deals were made without ink or witness. "Raimondo has built his house upon trust," Cesare continued gently. "But of late, that trust has begun to crumble, not by his hand, but by those close to him." Matteo listened, his heart steady. "A man in his circle," Cesare said, "has begun to move, without Raimondo's knowledge. Small things, subtle shifts, a tax here, a silent pressure there. It may seem nothing, but in our world, even the softest ripple can capsize the boat." He fixed Matteo with a gaze soft yet unyielding. "You will go to Palermo, you will listen, you will watch, and you will learn if the balance Raimondo guards still holds, or if it has begun to slip." There was no instruction beyond that, no names given, no paths laid. Only a task wrapped in quiet expectation. Matteo nodded once. At dawn, he set out for Palermo, the road unfolding before him like a soft, winding thread. The city welcomed him with its familiar hush, the low hum of market stalls, the distant clang of harbour bells, the soft cadence of voices drifting on the sea wind. Yet beneath its vibrant surface, Matteo sensed a subtle shift, an unease that brushed faintly against the edges of perception. He moved carefully, blending into the rhythms of the city, his presence as quiet as the wind that stirred the olive branches. He listened, at the docks where merchants whispered over crates of silks and spices, in the back rooms of cafes where deals were brokered over strong coffee and softer threats, among the alleyways where rumours flowed freer than wine. And slowly a pattern began to emerge. The name Matteo heard most often was not Raimondo's, but that of another, a man called Felice. A name seldom spoken with reverence, never with respect. Felice, it seemed, was a man of growing ambition, a merchant of shadows who traded not in goods but in quiet fear. Where Raimondo dealt in trust, Felice dealt in silent extortion. Matteo observed, waited, listened. He watched as Felice's men moved through the markets, their smiles thin, their words soft but edged with quiet menace. He noted the way traders spoke of Raimondo with fading confidence, how whispers of doubt crept slowly into corners once held firm by loyalty. And in every glance, every hushed exchange, Matteo saw the silent unravelling of trust, a thread pulled so gently that none had yet felt its absence. One evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the harbour's edge, Matteo followed Felice himself, watched him enter a modest house near the old quarter, alone but for the silent shadow of a man who stood guard at the door. Matteo did not approach. He did not need to. He only listened and learned. By the time the moon rose, Matteo knew enough. He returned to Corleone without fanfare, his report delivered to Cesare beneath the soft hush of dawn. Cesare listened in silence, his expression calm, his eyes reflecting the quiet depth of a man who measured the weight of every word. When Matteo finished, Cesare placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You have done well," he said softly. "You have seen what many would not notice until it was too late." There was no praise, no grand declaration, only a quiet acknowledgement, the kind that carried more weight than 1,000 spoken honours. And with that, Matteo understood anew the silent heart of their world. It was not power, nor fear, nor even loyalty that kept the balance whole. It was vigilance, the quiet watching, the silent waiting, the unseen hand that steadied the scales before they tipped too far. And Matteo had become one of those silent hands. The soft hush of early autumn fell upon Sicily like a whispered lullaby, its skies brushed with shades of fading gold, its fields rich with the quiet promise of harvest. In Corleone, the vineyards swayed gently under the breath of the wind, and the narrow streets held the stillness of a land content in its ancient rhythm. Yet beneath this calm, Matteo's world grew ever more intricate, woven tighter with silent threads of unseen duty, soft observation, and a growing sense of belonging to a brotherhood that spoke in glances and moved in shadows. It was during one such golden afternoon that Giulio called for him again, not with urgency, nor with the quiet summons of silent tasks past, but with a simple walk through the olive groves. The older man strolled beside Matteo, their steps slow, the sound of their passage little more than a soft murmur against the hush of swaying branches. "There is a man," Giulio began, his voice low and even, "who once walked our path and now walks away from it." Matteo said nothing, letting the quiet weight of those words settle between them. "His name is Lorenzo," Giulio continued, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Once a keeper of balance, now a man tempted by a louder world." Matteo listened, understanding with growing clarity what Giulio left unsaid. "There are men," Giulio whispered, "who forget that power must be silent, who believe that with enough gold, enough fear, they can shape the world to their liking and still remain unseen." He glanced at Matteo then, his eyes soft but edged with something deeper, a quiet sadness perhaps, or a warning carried on the soft wind of experience. "Lorenzo has begun to speak too loudly, to make promises no man of honour should make." The path wound gently through the grove, the sun casting dappled shadows upon the earth. "You will meet him," Giulio said at last. "You will listen. And you will remind him, gently, that some roads, once taken, lead to places no man can return from." There was no need for further instruction. Matteo understood. The next morning he set out for Agrigento, a city older than memory, perched upon a ridge of ancient stone and crowned by the silent remnants of Greek temples long surrendered to the whispers of time. The journey took him through soft valleys and along winding roads, the land rolling gently beneath the endless Sicilian sky. He found Lorenzo in a quiet inn overlooking the sea, a man of striking presence, his dark hair touched with threads of silver, his manner confident, almost careless. At first glance, Lorenzo seemed every bit the successful merchant, a man of the world at ease with his place upon it. But Matteo, with eyes now honed by silent lessons, saw beneath the polished veneer. They sat together at a small wooden table on the inn's terrace, the scent of salt and sun-baked stone hanging softly in the air. "You're young," Lorenzo said with a faint smile, studying Matteo with a gaze both curious and faintly amused. "Too young for this? Business." Matteo met his eyes without hesitation. "I came only to listen." Lorenzo's smile lingered a moment longer before fading into something quieter. "Then listen well," he said, his voice low but edged with a subtle defiance. "The world is changing, ragazzo. The old ways, the silent ways, they won't hold forever. There is power now in boldness, in taking what others hesitate to touch." Matteo remained silent, watching, waiting. Lorenzo leaned forward, his expression sharpening. "The bosses, the old men, they hold Sicily back. They cling to whispers, to shadows, but the world belongs to those who reach for it." For a moment, the only sound between them was the soft lap of waves against the rocky shore below. And then Matteo spoke, his voice as soft as the sea breeze. "The world belongs to those who keep it from falling apart." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed slightly. "Power without restraint is a fire that burns everything," Matteo said gently. "Even the men who lit it." There was no threat in his words, no challenge, only a quiet truth, spoken with the steady calm of one who had come not to confront, but to remind. Lorenzo regarded him for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at the edge of his lips. "You speak like a man twice your age," he murmured. "Perhaps even like Giulio." Matteo offered no reply. The conversation ended not with a warning, nor with a pledge, but with a quiet understanding that hung between them like a soft, lingering echo. Whether Lorenzo heard that echo, or chose to ignore it, remained to be seen. Matteo left Agrigento with the same quiet calm with which he had arrived. He had delivered no ultimatum, made no demands. He had only reminded a man, softly and clearly, that some roads ended not in triumph, but in ruin. When he returned to Corleone, Giulio met him beneath the ancient oak near the church, a silent greeting, a simple nod. "He listened?" Giulio asked softly. Matteo nodded once. He heard. Giulio placed a hand on his shoulder, a brief, silent gesture, and spoke no further. In that moment, Matteo felt the quiet deepening of his role within the unseen web that held Sicily's fragile peace. He understood now that theirs was a world balanced not by force, but by quiet vigilance, a constant, steady watching of men and motives, of hearts and ambitions. And in this silent service, Matteo's name began to move, softly like a whisper carried by the wind, through villages and cities, spoken with respect not earned by deeds of violence, but by the quiet power of a man who listened and reminded. The world, Matteo understood, did not need louder men. It needed quieter ones. The sun had barely begun to slide beneath the rim of the Tyrrhenian Sea when a heavy hush fell over the stony alleyways of Palermo's old quarter. It was the 10th evening since young Matteo Falcone had been brought into the fold, a newcomer among men whose eyes carried the weight of secrets stretching back generations. On that humid Sicilian night, his footsteps echoed against walls cracked with centuries of whispered transactions and silent oaths. Matteo's apprenticeship within the inner shadows of the Cosa Nostra was not granted out of mere familial ties, nor as a token of local favoritism. Rather, it had been forged through a series of quiet, almost invisible trials. Every command he received seemed simple at first glance. Carry a message, watch a door, deliver a package, but each bore layers of consequence only the wise could perceive. And on this night, as he waited beneath the leaning eaves of Via delle Pergole, he was about to face the most peculiar of these subtle tests. Don Ernesto Vitale, a man known for his voice softer than velvet yet harder than steel, had summoned Matteo with a simple phrase whispered that afternoon. "Tonight, you will see the whisper beneath the stone." No explanation had followed. The words danced in Matteo's mind, elusive, unsettling. As dusk deepened into the velvet folds of night, an old woman appeared from a side street, her back bowed, a woven basket slung over her thin arm. Her face, furrowed and hollowed by age, bore a faint, enigmatic smile. She moved toward Matteo without haste, her sandals rasping softly on the cobbles. "You wait for shadows, ragazzo?" she asked, voice cracked yet curiously warm. Matteo straightened. "I wait as I was told." She nodded, her pale eyes glinting faintly in the darkness. "Then you wait for me." Without another word, she reached into her basket and drew out a small cloth-wrapped bundle, handing it to him with a trembling hand. The weight of it surprised him. It felt heavier than it looked, dense with something that shifted faintly inside. When he looked up again, the woman was gone. Not a single footstep betrayed her departure, as though she had been no more than a drifting shadow. For a long moment, Matteo simply stared at the bundle, its folds soft against his palms. The narrow street lay silent, save for the distant cry of gulls over the port. His heart thudded with a quiet, relentless drumbeat. He knew better than to open it here. The code was clear. Curiosity was a luxury, and caution a necessity. Moving with deliberate care, he made his way to the address Don Ernesto had quietly mentioned, a forgotten chapel at the edge of the Ballarò market, its bell tower crumbling under the slow decay of centuries. The chapel door, worn smooth by countless hands, bore no lock. Matteo pushed it open with a soft creak. Inside, the air lay thick with the scent of old stone and faint incense. Flickering candles lined a makeshift altar, casting trembling shadows upon faded frescoes of solemn saints. Beneath this muted glow sat Don Ernesto himself, alone upon a wooden pew, his cane resting against his knee. "You have brought it," the Don said softly, eyes never leaving the flame of a nearby candle. "I have." Matteo's voice felt too loud, so he spoke again, this time softer. "I have, Padrino." "Good." The old man gestured toward a shallow hollow beneath the altar, a space scarcely wide enough to hold a loaf of bread. "Place it there." Matteo obeyed, sliding the bundle into the hollow. The cloth touched the cool stone with a faint whisper. He half expected Don Ernesto to rise, to explain, to acknowledge him. But instead the Don merely nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Now you will wait." And so Matteo stood in the cool stillness of that chapel as the minutes unwound like the slow drip of wax from the altar candles. He could feel the quiet observation of the Don, a presence that seemed both weighty and silent. And just when his thoughts began to drift toward restless questions, a faint knock echoed against the chapel door. Don Ernesto did not stir. Matteo, understanding his silent command, moved to open it. Outside stood a young man, perhaps no older than Matteo himself, his dark eyes wary beneath a mop of wind-tossed hair. He gave a subtle nod before stepping past Matteo and approaching the altar. Without a word, he knelt before the hollow, retrieving the bundle with careful reverence. For a moment, the two youths locked eyes, Matteo sensing in the stranger an unspoken recognition. The other gave a slight incline of his head, almost a bow, before retreating the way he had come. The chapel door whispered closed behind him. Only then did Don Ernesto finally rise, his movements slow, deliberate. His gaze met Matteo's with a calm gravity. "You have seen the first of many exchanges," the Don murmured. "What passed tonight was not merely a parcel, nor a message, but trust, layered upon silent pacts, wound within shadows. This is how power moves beneath the stone of our world." Matteo nodded, though his heart burned with silent questions. The Don studied him for a long, heavy moment. "You wonder, perhaps, why this matters? Why a bundle? Why a stranger? Why here?" "The answer, ragazzo, lies not in what was carried, but in how it moved, and who watched as it did." He turned toward the altar, tracing a hand along its edge. "The Sicilian Mafia is not in the thunder of violence, nor the clamour of riches. It thrives in whispers, in moments unseen by most eyes. Tonight, you were both a shadow and a witness. That is a beginning." Matteo stood still, absorbing the slow, profound weight of those words. The chapel, silent but for the soft flutter of candle flames, seemed to hold its breath around them. As they left together into the soft velvet of the Sicilian night, Matteo felt the unseen threads weaving tighter around his heart, a quiet, steady tether to a world few would ever glimpse and fewer still could survive. The morning sun filtered weakly through the shifting clouds that hovered low over Palermo's ancient skyline. Matteo walked alone along the narrow Via Vittorio Emanuele, his footsteps soft against the damp cobblestones. The air carried a faint scent of the sea, mingled with the aroma of morning bread from unseen bakeries, yet none of it stirred his senses. His thoughts remained adrift in the echoes of the previous night. Within the hushed chapel, the silent exchange and the lingering words of Don Ernesto. That morning was not like others. For the first time since his quiet induction, Matteo was summoned not by a whisper nor a discreet gesture, but by a formal call. An envelope slipped beneath his door, bearing only a single word written in a careful, slanted hand. Justitia. Justice. The word hung in his mind like a silent toll of a bell. He felt its weight before he even opened the small note enclosed within. The message was brief, written in the same elegant script. Via del Corso, the tailor's shop, noon. Bring no questions. By the time the church bells began their slow, rolling chime for the midday hour, Matteo stood before the small, unassuming shop on the bustling street. The tailor's sign hung askew, its paint peeling in soft flakes. The window revealed little bolts of muted fabrics, mannequins clad in half-finished suits, and a single black rose pressed against the inner pane of glass. He entered without knocking. Inside, the scent of pressed cloth and aged wood mingled in the cool air. An elderly man, thin as a thread of silk, sat hunched over a small workbench, stitching with meticulous care. His hands moved with the grace of habit, the needle darting through fabric as naturally as breathing. He did not look up. "You come for the measure," the man said, his voice low, yet sharp as a razor's edge. Matteo stepped forward, uncertain. "Ah, yes." The old tailor finally met his eyes, a gaze sharp and deep-set, as though threaded with silent knowledge. "Then stand there, arms to the side. Do not speak unless I ask." Obediently, Matteo stood still as the man approached, a soft measuring tape dangling from his bony fingers. He began to work with swift, silent efficiency, wrapping the tape around Matteo's shoulders, his chest, his arms. His touch was light, but his eyes studied Matteo with an intensity that unsettled. "This shop was my father's before me," the tailor murmured as he measured Matteo's wrist, "and his father's before him. But not for suits, not truly. We measure men here, ragazzo, measure them for what they carry in silence." Matteo felt the tape encircle his neck with a faint pressure, for strength, for fear, for loyalty. These are the measures that matter. The tailor paused, his eyes holding Matteo's with a quiet gravity. "Do you understand?" "I think so." A faint smile creased the tailor's lips. "You will, in time." With that, he slipped a slender piece of folded cloth into Matteo's jacket pocket, a gesture so swift it felt almost imagined. "You will wear this tonight," the old man whispered. "When you are called." The thread within it is dyed with old words, sewn by hands that remember the weight of silence. "Do not forget that." Without waiting for reply, the tailor turned back to his workbench, the soft rasp of his needle resuming its steady rhythm. As Matteo stepped back into the bustling street, the sounds of Palermo washing over him once more, he reached into his pocket. The cloth was a handkerchief, plain, finely made, its edge marked with a single embroidered symbol, a black rose like the one pressed against the tailor's window. He folded it carefully, feeling a chill ripple beneath his skin. That evening came draped in a curtain of soft violet dusk. Matteo followed the instructions given in yet another silent message, a location scrawled on a torn scrap of parchment. Teatro Massimo, the upper circle, 9th seat left side. The Grand Opera House loomed before him like a silent sentinel, its marble facade catching the fading light. Inside, the corridors were hushed, shadows stretching long upon polished floors. He ascended to the upper circle, each step echoing faintly beneath the grandeur of vaulted ceilings. When he reached the 9th seat, he found it empty, save for a single envelope resting upon its cushion. He sat slowly, taking the envelope in his hand. It bore no name, no seal, only the faint, almost imperceptible imprint of the black rose. Within, a single sheet of paper. 2 words. "Observe, remember." The lights dimmed. The soft murmur of the sparse audience faded into a hush. And then from the stage below, the opera began, a haunting aria that unfolded like a gentle lament, weaving through the silent air. But Matteo's eyes were not drawn to the performers nor the gilded stage. Instead, his gaze was fixed upon a shadowed box across the theatre, where a man in a dark suit sat unmoving, his face hidden in partial shadow. On the man's lap rested a similar folded handkerchief, its corner marked with the same black rose. And beside him, unnoticed by most, a young woman leaned forward in her seat, her hand slipping something small. A note, a key into the man's jacket pocket. The exchange was subtle, fleeting, veiled by the flowing music. Matteo watched, heart steady, breath quiet. He understood then, this was the essence of the hidden world he had been drawn into. Not the brutal flash of knives, nor the echo of gunfire, but the soft, slow ballet of secrets exchanged in plain sight beneath the veil of the ordinary. The performance ended. The curtain fell. The man in the box rose and disappeared into the flowing crowd. Matteo remained seated, the black rose handkerchief clenched softly in his hand, a silent witness to a world that moved beneath the surface of songs, shadows, and whispered glances. And as the last notes of the opera lingered in the air like a fading heartbeat, he knew he had crossed yet another unseen threshold, drawn deeper into the labyrinth of the silent brotherhood, where every glance, every motion, and every word carried the unseen weight of power and peril intertwined. The dawn after the opera came quietly, as though the world itself treaded with caution. In the heart of the old Palermo quarters, where the alleys curved like serpents and the stone walls bore the stains of 1,000 untold stories, Matteo awoke to the sound of faint tapping at his door. 3 soft knocks, a pause, 2 more, a rhythm he had been taught to recognize. He rose from his narrow bed without haste, his movements deliberate, the air around him thick with the hush of understanding. When he opened the door, no one stood upon the threshold. Only a small, worn envelope lay on the ground, a silent messenger. Matteo knelt, lifting it gently. The weight of it felt familiar now, like the steady pull of an unseen thread tightening around his life. He unfolded the parchment within. The message bore only a location and a time. Porta Felice, tonight, midnight. No signature, no words of explanation. Just a place where the city's ancient gate met the restless sea, a boundary between the known and the vast unknown. The day stretched ahead of him like a long-held breath. Matteo moved through the streets in quiet observation. The world seemed unchanged. Merchants called out their wares with practiced charm, fishermen hauled their silvered catch to waiting carts. Children darted through the crowded piazzas with laughter sharp as gull cries. Yet beneath it all, Matteo sensed the hidden current, the silent symphony to which only a few could ever attune their ears. That evening, as the shadows grew long and the sun slipped like a burning coin into the western sea, he prepared with the solemn care of a man dressing for his own reckoning. He wore a plain black suit, its lines sharp but unremarkable. Around his neck, tucked neatly within his collar, he folded the black rose handkerchief, a silent emblem. The walk to Porta Felice felt like descending into the whispered heart of the city itself. The streets grew quieter as he neared the ancient gate, two massive stone pillars standing guard over the edge of the world, weathered by salt, wind and time. He arrived before the appointed hour. The sea breeze brushed soft against his face, carrying with it the faint, briny scent of distant horizons. Beneath the arch of the gate, a single figure stood waiting, a man tall and slender, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. Matteo approached with steady steps. "You came," the man said softly, his voice neither welcoming nor cold. "Good." The stranger gestured for Matteo to follow, turning toward a narrow path that curved along the seawall. They walked side by side in silence, the soft wash of waves against stone their only companion. After a time the man spoke again. "Do you know why you are here?" Matteo shook his head. "No." The man gave a soft, almost approving hum. "Because you are learning, and those who learn observe before they question." They stopped at a low stone wall, beyond which the dark sea stretched into infinity. The stranger placed his hands upon the worn stone, his fingers long and thin. "There are those who believe the Mafia lives by violence," he said, his voice low as the wind. "They are wrong. Violence is a tool, sharp, fleeting, dangerous, but it is not the blood that feeds the heart of this life." He turned his head slightly, eyes glinting beneath the shadow of his hat. "Fear is. Fear and memory." Matteo listened, silent. "The true power of our world," the man continued, "lies in knowing what others forget, in remembering what others wish buried. A man who fears your memory holds himself prisoner to it." He drew from his coat a small, slender notebook, its leather cover worn thin by use, and held it out to Matteo. "This," the stranger said, "is your task tonight, a ledger of remembrance, names, debts, favors, betrayals, not written in ink, nor upon this paper. This is a shadow copy. The real ledger is here." He tapped lightly against his own temple. "You will read it, then burn it, and when you do, you will carry its weight within you, as I have carried mine, as all who came before us have done." Matteo took the notebook with careful hands. The leather felt warm, almost alive beneath his fingers. The man stepped back, his figure folding into the deeper shadows. "Tonight you begin not as a courier nor a watcher, but as a keeper. The memory of the family must be guarded beyond life itself." He gave Matteo a long, lingering look. "If you fail, you vanish. If you succeed, you become invisible." Without another word, the man turned and walked away, his silhouette dissolving into the night air like mist upon the sea. Matteo remained by the seawall, the small ledger held softly in his grasp. He opened it beneath the pale gleam of the rising moon. Inside, lines of names flowed like a silent river, each accompanied by a brief cryptic note. Codes of debt, marks of favor, the silent fingerprints of a hidden empire. He read them all. When he finished, he struck a match upon the stone and set the pages aflame. The fire flickered briefly, a fragile ghost against the sea wind before dissolving into ash. He watched the last ember fade into the darkness, a soft, silent exhale. And with it, Matteo felt something shift within him, a quiet knot tightening, an invisible thread drawing him ever deeper into the heart of a world where memory was currency, and forgetting was a death none would see coming. The sea whispered softly at his back. The city watched in silence before him. And in the heart of that boundless night, Matteo Falcone became more than a shadow. He became a keeper of the hidden truth, The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm, each moment carrying the delicate tension of a drawn bowstring. Palermo moved around Matteo with its usual disarming charm, sun-drenched piazzas alive with chatter, narrow streets painted in layers of laundry and laughter, the hum of markets and the sigh of the sea. Yet beneath this vibrant surface, Matteo lived in another world entirely, a world that moved softly, beneath notice, and thrived in the art of seeing without being seen. He spent his hours in observation. At first, his tasks seemed deceptively mundane. Sit at a cafe table from morning until dusk, watching a certain doorway. Follow a man through the winding streets until he reached a familiar corner, then turn away without acknowledgement. Memorize the faces of a group dining together at a trattoria, and note who paid, who spoke, who stayed silent. But within these silent errands, Matteo began to sense the deeper game, an unspoken choreography where every glance, every hesitation, every coin exchanged revealed more than words ever could. He became a student of invisible threads. One afternoon, as the golden light of late summer bathed the narrow lanes of La Calza, Matteo was summoned by a soft-spoken messenger, a boy no older than 12 who offered no words, only a folded slip of paper pressed into his palm. The note was inked with a single phrase: Casa di Vetro, dusk. The glass house. The name stirred something faint in Matteo's memory. A whispered rumor passed between men who never spoke their secrets aloud. It was said to be a place that existed between the worlds of legality and shadow, a sanctuary of confidences and quiet reckonings. No one entered unless called, none left unchanged. Dusk fell soft and slow as Matteo approached the address marked discreetly on the map etched into his mind. The building stood at the edge of the ancient harbour, a modest facade of stone and glass, its windows polished to a mirror-like gleam that reflected the soft hues of the dying sun. The door bore no sign, only a simple iron handle shaped like a key. He entered with a steady hand. Inside, the air hummed with a peculiar stillness. The interior was bathed in soft, muted light, walls lined with dark wood and glass panels etched with delicate, swirling patterns. A faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, mingled with the dry whisper of old parchment. At the center of the room stood a round table, its surface inlaid with a mosaic of glass shards forming the shape of a rose, black at its heart, crimson at its edges. Around the table sat 3 figures. The first, a woman draped in a gown of midnight silk, her hair wound in a simple knot. Her gaze was calm, her hands folded softly upon the table's edge. The second, a man broad of shoulder with eyes like polished onyx, his dark suit tailored to the subtle perfection of the old city's finest houses. The third, Don Ernesto himself, his presence quiet, yet unyielding as the stone walls that seemed to lean inward with silent reverence. Matteo bowed his head slightly as he stepped forward. No words were spoken. The Don gave a faint nod, motioning for him to stand beside the table. The woman was the first to speak, her voice a soft murmur like water flowing over smooth stones. You have been called, Matteo Falcone, to bear witness, to learn the art that binds this world beyond the reach of law or sword. The man with the onyx eyes continued, his voice low and sure. Tonight you will learn the silent accords, the pacts made not with ink nor with blood, but with the currency of respect and fear. Don Ernesto's gaze met Matteo's with quiet intensity, and you will learn when to listen and when to remember. They gestured for Matteo to watch as the woman placed upon the table a slender ledger bound in soft, dark leather. She opened it with careful hands, revealing columns of names paired with cryptic symbols, brief notes in an elegant cipher. The woman began to read aloud, not the names nor the debts, but the history behind each entry. With each account, she unfolded a fragment of the invisible world Matteo had only glimpsed. A baker who sheltered a fugitive cousin of a capo, a magistrate whose son's debts were erased by a quiet favor, a fisherman whose silence turned the tide of a vendetta. With every tale, Matteo felt the layers of this shadowed society unfurl before him, not as a web of mere crime, but as a living network of unseen obligations, silent exchanges, and trust woven in threads finer than any blade could cut. Then came the lessons of silence. The man spoke of the power within words unspoken, the ability to guide a man's fate with a glance, to grant mercy with a nod, or to seal doom with a simple turning away. Silence, the man said softly, is not absence. It is presence, controlled and measured, It is the mark of those who rule without crown or sword. Matteo listened, absorbing each word with a mind sharpened by the weight of the unseen. At the close of the meeting, Don Ernesto rose, his movements slow and deliberate. He placed a hand lightly upon Matteo's shoulder. "You are not yet of us," the Don murmured, his voice a soft echo against the hush of the chamber. "But you are now within us. Remember, respect, memory, silence. They will be your shield when swords fail, and your weapon when none dare strike." As Matteo stepped back into the cool breath of the Sicilian night, the stars glimmered faintly above the harbour's quiet waters. He felt the world shift beneath his feet, a silent turning of fate's great wheel. And with that night beneath the glass house's silent gaze, Matteo Falcone walked deeper into the heart of a world where the true currency was neither gold nor blood, but the delicate, unbreakable threads of silent power woven beneath the watchful eyes of the unseen. The soft days of early autumn came draped in a hush of golden mist. Palermo's streets, once thick with the restless energy of summer, now carried a quieter hum, the kind that slipped beneath the skin, like the faint murmur of a secret shared in confidence. Matteo walked those streets with a steady gait, a quiet observer woven seamlessly into the fabric of the city's rhythm. But within him, the echoes of the glass house lingered. It was not the names nor the faces that stayed with him. It was the realization that power in this veiled world belonged to those who dared to remember what others prayed to forget. He carried that weight now, invisible to the eyes of strangers, but heavy as iron upon his heart. One evening, as the sky bled into hues of soft indigo and copper, Matteo found himself standing before the narrow entrance of a small wine shop hidden among the tangled lanes of Vucceria Market. It bore no sign, save for a faded carving of a lion's head upon its oak door. He had been told to come here by a voice he trusted, a name not spoken aloud, a message passed from hand to hand like a silent echo. He entered without knocking. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of oak barrels and aged grapes. Soft lamplight flickered upon the polished wood of the narrow counter, behind which stood a figure draped in a simple grey coat, a woman with sharp, elegant features and eyes the colour of burnished brass. She gave him a long, appraising look. Then, with a slow nod, she beckoned him forward. "You are the Watcher," she said, her voice calm, touched with a faint accent from the Western Isles. "I am the Listener," Matteo replied softly, an answer taught to him beneath the stone arches of the Casa di Vetro. Her expression softened into a faint, approving smile. Without a word, she reached beneath the counter and drew forth a slender wooden box, its surface smooth and dark, bearing the faint scent of cedar. She placed it upon the counter before him. "You will deliver this," she said quietly, "but not with haste, and not with words." Matteo nodded once, waiting for her to continue. "The man you seek waits at the edge of the old olive grove, beyond Monte Pellegrino. He will stand alone, at the second stone archway. You will hand this to him. He will not thank you. You will not speak. If he speaks, you listen. If he remains silent, you turn and leave." Her eyes held his with quiet gravity. The box is sealed with more than wood and brass. It carries a choice, and within it, a remembrance of debt owed in blood. Do you understand? "I do." The woman regarded him for a moment longer before offering the faintest nod of dismissal. Matteo left with the box cradled beneath his arm, its weight curious, not heavy, yet unmistakably significant. As he stepped back into the cooling evening air, the city seemed to retreat behind a soft veil. The murmurs of the market faded into the background as he walked, each step carrying him toward a path woven with more than simple errands. The journey to Monte Pellegrino was a silent pilgrimage. The ancient path curved through thickets of olive and cypress, the air filled with the soft chorus of unseen birds and the low rustle of wind against ancient branches. The moon rose slowly, casting its gentle silver upon the worn stones beneath his feet. When Matteo reached the second archway, a relic of some forgotten estate long surrendered to the embrace of time, he saw him. A solitary figure stood beneath the arch, cloaked in a dark coat, his hands folded before him. His face was turned slightly away, as though listening to something beyond the realm of sound. Matteo approached with careful steps. The man did not move nor speak as Matteo came to stand before him. Wordlessly, Matteo extended the box. For a heartbeat, nothing passed between them but silence thick as the night air. Then the man reached out, taking the box with a slow, deliberate motion. His fingers brushed briefly against Matteo's, cool, steady. He met Matteo's eyes then, an expression unreadable, but within it, a depth that spoke of wounds long buried and debts never forgotten. He gave the faintest inclination of his head, a gesture so small it seemed almost imagined. Matteo held his gaze, offering nothing but a slight nod in return. The man turned away without a word, vanishing into the quiet shadows of the grove as though swallowed by the earth itself. Matteo stood alone beneath the silent archway, the moonlight soft upon the ancient stones. He felt no triumph, no fear, only a quiet certainty that the threads binding him to this hidden world grew tighter with each silent task, each unseen gesture. When he finally turned to leave, the wind stirred softly around him, carrying with it a faint whisper, whether from the leaves, the stones, or the lingering echo of a silent exchange, he could not say. And in that quiet walk back through the olive grove, Matteo Falcone understood something deeper than any lesson spoken aloud. In this world of shadows and whispers, a man's worth was not measured by his voice, but by the silences he carried, and the unseen burdens he bore without ever letting them slip into the light. The soft hush of dawn settled gently over the tiled rooftops of Palermo as Matteo returned from Monte Pellegrino. The city stirred beneath a veil of silvery mist, its heartbeat slow, its secrets sleeping within the walls of ancient stone. The path back wound quietly through empty streets, past shuttered shops and silent fountains, where only the soft coo of pigeons echoed faintly. But in Matteo's heart there was no rest. The memory of the silent man beneath the arch, the weight of that brief, wordless exchange, pressed upon him with a curious intensity. It wasn't fear that lingered, nor a sense of foreboding. It was a strange understanding. That power in this hidden world thrived in quiet acknowledgements and invisible bonds. By midday, Matteo received another message. This time it was delivered not by a messenger boy, nor left at his door. It came folded within a loaf of bread, hand-delivered by a baker who smiled with the absent warmth of a man used to being unnoticed. The note read only, "The House of Ashes, dusk." He did not ask questions. He had learned better. The House of Ashes was a name whispered among the oldest circles, a building rumoured to have once housed a noble family fallen into ruin, their estate burned to embers in a feud no one dared recall. Now it stood at the edge of the Capo district, its blackened stones a quiet monument to the past, a place left untouched by time or curiosity. Dusk found Matteo standing before its charred facade. The remnants of carved archways and cracked marble columns loomed like silent sentinels. The iron gate hung half open, swaying softly with the whisper of the evening breeze. He stepped through. Inside, the remains of grandeur clung stubbornly to the shadows, tattered remnants of velvet curtains, fragments of a fresco kissed by soot, staircases that led nowhere but into the dark. The air smelled faintly of old smoke and damp earth. In the heart of the grand hall, beneath a chandelier long turned to twisted iron, stood a single figure, Don Ernesto Vitale. His presence felt heavier here, amid the ashes and whispers of forgotten legacies. He stood with his hands clasped lightly behind his back, his head slightly bowed, as though in contemplation. Matteo approached with quiet steps, waiting for the Don to speak. "You have walked the silent path," Don Ernesto said softly, his voice carrying the soft weight of velvet and iron. "You have observed, delivered, remembered." He turned, his eyes meeting Matteo's with a steady calm. "But now you must learn to disappear." Matteo felt the faintest stir within his chest, a quiet pulse of curiosity tempered by restraint. The Don gestured toward a darkened doorway. "Beyond this hall waits a man whose name you will never know. He will teach you what cannot be spoken aloud, how to be present without being seen, how to move with the world yet leave no trace upon it." He stepped closer, placing a hand gently upon Matteo's shoulder. "In our world, power flows through silence, memory and fear, but none of it matters if you cannot vanish when the moment calls for it." Matteo met his gaze without flinching. "I am ready." A faint smile touched the corner of the Don's mouth. "We shall see." Without another word, the Don stepped aside, his hand falling away as gently as it had come. Matteo entered the shadowed doorway. The room beyond was darker, the air cooler, thick with the scent of aged stone and faint tobacco. A single oil lamp flickered in the corner, its soft flame casting long, trembling shadows upon the floor. Seated upon a low wooden stool was a man cloaked in a plain coat of charcoal grey, his face partially obscured by the brim of a worn hat. His posture was relaxed, his hands resting loosely upon his knees. He looked up as Matteo entered, eyes sharp, pale as morning mist. "You are the boy who listens," the man said softly. Matteo inclined his head. "I am." The man gave a faint nod, rising with fluid grace. "Good, then listen well." What followed was not a lesson in words, nor a lecture of methods. It was a series of motions, a dance of silent movement taught through example. The man moved like shadow upon stone, his steps soft as a whisper, his presence fading into the folds of the room with each measured breath. He taught Matteo how to walk in rhythm with the world's natural sounds, the wind against the walls, the creak of distant shutters, the murmur of footsteps upon distant cobbles. How to breathe with the heartbeat of the street, how to slip between the spaces people left in their awareness. Hours passed in quiet instruction. A nod here, a gesture there, a correction made with the gentlest of touches. And with each passing moment, Matteo felt himself drawn deeper into a space between presence and absence. At the night's end, the man placed a slender gloved hand upon Matteo's shoulder. "Remember," he whispered, "to vanish is not to escape. It is to become part of the world so completely that it no longer notices you. A whisper in a chorus, a shadow at dusk." He met Matteo's eyes with a quiet gravity. "And when you have learned this, you will never be alone again, because the world will carry you within its silence." Matteo left the House of Ashes long after midnight, his steps light, his breath steady. And for the first time since he had walked this hidden path, the city itself seemed to fold around him, its walls, its streets, its very heartbeat embracing him not as a stranger, but as one of its silent shadows. In the days that followed his silent training beneath the soot-stained walls of the House of Ashes, Matteo Falcone moved through Palermo like a whisper riding upon the slow breath of the city. The lessons learned in shadow had woven themselves into his very manner, his steps lighter, his presence thinner, his gaze sharper yet more veiled. He began to understand how a man could stand amid a crowd unseen by all and leave behind nothing but a lingering sense of something, or someone, forgotten. It was in this newfound quietness that the next message came. Unlike the cryptic notes hidden in loaves or whispered in passing, this arrived folded within a letter of plain correspondence, a merchant's ledger delivered to the doorstep of the boarding house where Matteo kept his modest room. The envelope bore no seal, the ink no special mark. Yet when Matteo unfolded the papers, nestled among figures of trade and shipment records, he found a single, narrow strip of parchment. "The bell tower. Midnight. Do not ascend." The words stirred an unfamiliar tension beneath Matteo's skin. The bell tower, a landmark most Palermitans passed with scarcely a glance, stood near the northern edge of the ancient city, its bricks worn pale by centuries of salt air, a place both visible to all and noticed by none. As night fell and the narrow streets grew hushed beneath a waxing moon, Matteo made his way there, each step measured, every breath drawn in quiet readiness. The bell tower rose before him like a sentinel of stone, its spire cutting a thin line against the starlit sky. He arrived at the base just before midnight. The air was thick with the scent of sea spray and distant citrus groves. The tower's ancient door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the whisper of the night wind. Matteo moved close but obeyed the instruction. He did not ascend. Instead, he settled into the shadows cast by the buttress wall, blending into the folds of darkness as though born from it. Minutes passed. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate, approached along the narrow alley that wrapped the tower's base. Matteo watched as a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, face hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat. The man moved with the same precision Matteo had been taught, his gaze shifting subtly as though tasting the air for unseen eyes. Behind him followed another, a shorter man in a pale coat, his head uncovered, revealing sharp features and thinning grey hair. His hands remained clasped before him, the fingers trembling ever so faintly. They stopped near the tower's base, beneath the shadow of the bell itself. The taller figure turned slightly, speaking in a voice just loud enough to reach Matteo's straining ears. "You know why you're here," the tall man said. The grey-haired man gave a shallow nod. "I do," You owe. I do. A silence settled between them, heavy and absolute. Then the taller man reached into his coat and drew forth a small leather pouch, the kind used for coins, though its contents stirred with a softer weight. This is the payment, the last you will ever make. The grey-haired man took it with trembling fingers. You will not speak of this again, the taller man said, his voice a calm murmur. To anyone. You will remember only in silence, and when called, you will answer. The grey-haired man nodded again, his eyes low. I understand. Without further word, the tall man turned, stepping back into the shadows of the alley. The grey-haired man stood still for a long moment, clutching the pouch as though it weighed 1,000 stones. Then, slowly, he too disappeared into the folds of the city. Matteo remained unmoving, heart steady. He understood now the bell tower was a gathering point, a place for exchanges of weight far heavier than coins or whispered debts. A sanctuary where compacts of silence were sealed beneath the gaze of no one, yet watched by those unseen. When the hour struck and the bell gave its deep, resonant toll, Matteo slipped away, his steps soft as falling ash. The following morning, Matteo received a letter, this time hand-delivered by the same boy who had once brought him a message without words. The envelope bore a single black dot upon its seal. He opened it with care. You watched, you remembered. Tonight you will speak, the white courtyard, midnight. A chill ran beneath Matteo's skin. He had learned to observe, to listen, to vanish. But this was a new threshold. The command to speak was not given lightly. Words in the shadowed world of the Cosa Nostra could build empires or crush men beneath their silent weight. That night, he made his way toward the white courtyard, a place whispered of in rare conversations. It lay hidden behind the old theatre district, its entrance marked by a faded crest no one dared deface. Known only to a few, it served as a silent court, where the spoken word held the weight of life or death. The courtyard unfolded before Matteo like a soft sigh, white stone walls rising gently around a marble floor veined with silver, bathed in the pale glow of the rising moon. At its centre stood a single chair of dark wood, simple and unadorned. Seated within it, Don Ernesto. Around him, half hidden by the shadows of the surrounding colonnade, stood men and women Matteo had glimpsed before but never known. Faces marked by years, by silence, by quiet power. Don Ernesto gestured softly. Come. Matteo stepped forward, the soft echo of his steps swallowed by the hush of the gathered court. You have listened, you have remembered, you have vanished. The Don's voice was low, calm, unwavering. Now you will speak, Matteo Falcone. You will speak, and what you say will never be forgotten. The circle of shadowed figures watched, silent as stone. Matteo drew a steady breath, feeling the weight of unseen eyes, the hush of unseen ears. He spoke. He recounted, softly, clearly, the exchange at the bell tower. Every word, every gesture, every silence between them. He spoke not as a man repeating a tale, but as one bearing a memory as fragile and indelible as glass. When his voice fell silent, the Don regarded him for a long, quiet moment. Then, with a slow, approving nod, Don Ernesto rose. You have spoken, Matteo, and the court has heard. You now carry not only your silence, but ours. The circle bowed their heads, a silent benediction. And in that moment, beneath the watching eyes of the silent court, Matteo Falcone crossed yet another threshold, a keeper not only of memories and shadows, but of the words that shaped the very breath of the invisible world he now called his own. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and lemon blossoms as Matteo Falcone stepped out of the white courtyard that night, his shadow falling long across the cobblestones of the silent street. The hush of the gathering still echoed within him, not as a sound, but as a living weight pressed against the marrow of his bones. He had spoken, and now he understood what it meant to be remembered by those who ruled the world unseen. The days that followed unfolded with a curious calm. The city moved with its usual vibrant pulse, markets brimming with voices, gondoliers singing softly along the narrow canals, fishermen trading stories beneath the golden sweep of the morning sun. But for Matteo, everything now carried an undertone of quiet significance. He had joined a lineage without names, a brotherhood bound not by blood, but by silence and memory. His face, his voice, his very presence now bore the invisible imprint of the court's acknowledgement. He belonged, yet remained apart. But the true test of this silent belonging came sooner than he had expected. One evening, as the crimson wash of sunset faded over the rooftops of La Loggia, Matteo was approached in the most unexpected of places. A small bookshop tucked within a winding alleyway, where only the faintest of patrons drifted between shelves heavy with dust and forgotten pages. He stood by a shelf of old maritime charts when the voice came softly beside him. "You will come with me." Matteo turned, his expression calm, his pulse unmoved. A man stood beside him, middle-aged, finely dressed in a suit of pale grey, his eyes sharp beneath a brimmed hat. He bore no sign, no emblem, yet his voice carried the quiet authority of one who did not speak unless his words shaped fates. Without a word, Matteo followed him out of the shop, into the falling dusk. They walked through narrow lanes until the crowds faded and the soft murmur of the harbour replaced the clamour of the market. There, beside a low stone wall overlooking the darkening sea, the man finally spoke again. "There are debts," he said quietly, "that cannot be collected by words, nor by the silent hand. There are moments when a man must stand where no shadow can shield him, where his presence alone delivers the message." He turned, meeting Matteo's gaze with eyes like polished stone. "Tonight you will deliver such a message." Matteo gave a slight nod. "To whom?" The man smiled faintly, as if amused by the simplicity of the question. He drew a folded parchment from his coat, handing it over with a slow, deliberate motion. "To one who has forgotten the cost of forgetting." The parchment bore no name, only a simple sketch, the unmistakable outline of a coastal villa perched upon a rocky cliff, windows framed in ivy, a single olive tree growing by its gate. "You will go there at the hour of the third bell after sunset," the man continued. "You will knock once, the door will open, you will step inside and speak these words." He leaned closer, his voice falling into a soft murmur that seemed to press against the hush of the evening itself. "The wind remembers. That is all," the man finished, stepping back. "No more, no less." Matteo folded the parchment and placed it within his coat. "And if they do not answer?" The man's eyes lingered upon him a moment longer. "They will." Without another word, the stranger turned and disappeared into the descending night, his steps as soft as the hush of the sea. Matteo stood alone beneath the soft rise of the moon, his thoughts calm, his breath steady. When the third bell tolled, he arrived at the villa. It stood as the sketch had promised. A silent sentinel upon the cliff, its walls bathed in the silver sheen of moonlight, the single olive tree casting a crooked shadow upon the ground. The gate stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. Matteo stepped forward, his fingers brushing the iron as he passed. At the door he raised his hand and knocked once, firm, clear, without hesitation. A long moment passed. Then the door opened. Before him stood a man, older, shoulders bowed, eyes dark as a storm-washed sea. He said nothing, only regarded Matteo with a gaze that weighed and measured in the span of a breath. Matteo met his eyes, calm, unwavering. "The wind remembers," he said softly. The man's face did not change, but within his eyes Matteo saw it, a flicker, sharp as the strike of a blade beneath velvet. Without a word, the man stepped aside. Matteo entered. Inside, the villa was shrouded in a quiet that felt older than the stone walls themselves. Shadows clung to the corners. The air carried a faint, bitter trace of old tobacco and dried herbs. The man led him to a small sitting room, where a single chair faced an empty fireplace. He gestured for Matteo to sit. "I was told," the man said after a long silence, "that if I heard those words, I would know my debt has been remembered." Matteo gave a slow nod, saying nothing. The man exhaled, a sound soft as wind against stone. "Then it is done," he murmured. "Tell them, I will not forget again." He stood, his hands clasped lightly before him. "You may leave." Matteo rose, offered a faint nod, and stepped back into the hush of the Sicilian night. As he walked away from the villa, his heart remained still, his mind clear. He had spoken the words given to him, words heavier than iron, yet softer than a whisper. And in that quiet exchange, a legacy of fear, memory, and silent allegiance had been rekindled without blade, without blood, only words. Yet Matteo knew. It was those words, carried upon the soft breath of a single voice, that truly ruled the unseen world. The autumn wind carried with it the soft scent of fallen leaves and the faint, lingering aroma of wood smoke, as Matteo Falcone made his way back through the winding alleys of Palermo. The city pulsed quietly beneath the night sky, the lamps casting long golden trails upon the cobblestones. Yet beneath the familiar rhythm of its streets, Matteo felt the weight of his latest task settle upon him like an invisible mantle. He had spoken the words. And somewhere in the heart of the unseen brotherhood, the echoes of those words would ripple across silent networks far deeper than any current of coin or blade. The wind remembers. Now it was not only Matteo who remembered, but those who watched from behind the veils of power. 2 days passed before the next message came. Slipped beneath the door of a quiet inn, where Matteo had begun to spend his nights, the ink written in the same slanted, deliberate hand that seemed to move through every corner of the Sicilian underworld. The harbour at dawn. The watchmaker. The watchmaker. A name Matteo had only heard in passing, wrapped in whispers among those who spoke carefully of the most invisible hands within the Cosa Nostra. Men said he was neither capo nor killer, but something altogether more dangerous, a keeper of time within the labyrinth of the silent brotherhood. He did not deal in clocks, but in moments, in the precise ticks of opportunity and consequence. Matteo rose before the sun. The harbour stretched out before him in a quiet hush as pale dawnlight traced soft lines across the water's surface. The ships rocked gently in their moorings, their masts swaying against the soft pull of the sea. Fishermen moved along the docks with practiced ease, their voices low, their eyes weary. And there, beside a weathered post wrapped in salt-stained rope, stood the man Matteo had come for. He was older, his hair silvered by time, his coat a plain shade of ash grey. In his hands he held a small, delicate pocket watch, its chain glinting faintly in the soft light. He studied it with the quiet intensity of a man measuring not the hour, but something deeper. Something beneath the surface of time itself. When Matteo approached, the watchmaker spoke without looking up. "You are on time." Matteo gave a slight nod. "I was told you would be here." The watchmaker closed the timepiece with a soft click and finally met Matteo's eyes. "Then you have already passed the first test. Many arrive early, more arrive late. Only a few understand the value of arriving when expected." He slipped the watch into his coat and motioned for Matteo to walk beside him. They moved in silence along the edge of the docks, the soft creak of the harbour mingling with the faint cries of gulls overhead. After a while, the watchmaker spoke again. "Time, in our world, is not measured in minutes or hours. It is measured in moments, in silences kept, in words spoken at precisely the right instant, in waiting until the world breathes in before you act." He gave Matteo a sidelong glance. "A blade strikes in seconds, a reputation takes years, and a single moment of forgetting can unmake a lifetime of careful silence." Matteo listened, his steps even, his heart calm. The watchmaker stopped before a low warehouse marked by faded paint and rusted chains. Without speaking, he gestured for Matteo to enter first. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and oil. Sunlight pierced through cracks in the boarded walls, casting long, narrow beams across crates marked with symbols Matteo did not recognize. At the center of the room sat a small, circular table. Upon it rested a single object, a silver watch, its face cracked, its hands frozen at precisely 2 minutes past midnight. The watchmaker moved to the table and gestured for Matteo to sit across from him. "This," he said softly, his fingers brushing the broken watch, "belonged to a man who forgot his moment." He lifted it gently, turning it slowly between his fingers. He spoke when he should have been silent, acted when he should have waited. His mistake was not betrayal nor weakness. It was forgetting that time does not wait for men. It moves with them or against them. He placed the watch down, folding his hands before him. "Your lesson today is simple," the watchmaker continued. "You will wait with me, and when the time is right, you will speak a single word." Matteo met his eyes with steady calm. "What word?" The watchmaker gave a faint smile. "You will know." They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The soft sounds of the harbour drifted through the walls, footsteps, voices, the low hum of a boat engine in the distance. Matteo sat motionless, his breath quiet, his senses attuned to every flicker of sound, every shift of shadow. And then it happened. The door creaked ever so slightly. A soft shuffle echoed against the floorboards. A single step, light as a breath, yet out of place. The watchmaker remained still, his hands folded, his eyes unmoving. Matteo heard it, the faint, sharp intake of breath from beyond the far crate. His heart beat once, twice, and then softly he spoke. "Enough." The word fell into the hush like a stone into still water. A long silence followed. Then, from behind the crate, a man stepped into view, slender, young, his face pale, his hands empty. His eyes met the watchmaker's with a mixture of fear and weary resignation. The watchmaker nodded once. Go. The man lowered his eyes and slipped away into the shadows. Matteo remained seated, his pulse steady. The watchmaker leaned back in his chair, his faint smile returning. You see, he said softly, the right word at the right time can unmake a knife before it strikes, or stop a betrayal before it begins. Not by force, not by fear, but by knowing when. He stood, gathering the cracked watch in his hand. You have learned your lesson. Matteo rose with him, the weight of the moment settling quietly within his heart. As they stepped back into the soft light of the dawn, the watchmaker placed a hand lightly upon Matteo's shoulder. Remember this, Matteo Falcone. In our world, time does not forgive, and those who learn to move with it never fall beneath its shadow. And in that quiet morning, beneath the soft hush of Palermo's harbour, Matteo Falcone carried with him a new understanding, that in the silent empire of the unseen, power belonged not to those who struck first, but to those who waited, and chose their moment to strike with perfect, devastating silence. Chamrai, Emdem, Jokkenyang Nirungu. A hush spreads across the dusty courtyard of the old Palermo villa as evening settles, its orange glow casting patterned shadows through the wrought iron gates. Inside, Enzo stands on the terrace, hands lightly resting on the cool stone balustrade. Tonight, he is thinking, the Famiglia has changed, but the hidden spirits of its past still linger. A soft breeze drifts through the orange blossom trees, bringing with it sense of memory. Flowers, gunpowder, and the sea beyond the ancient harbour. As he breathes it in, the weight of inheritance settles gently on his shoulders. Enzo's mind drifts to his great-uncle, Don Vittorio, an enigmatic figure whispered about in hushed tones during clandestine mezzo-literary gatherings. He had been a man of contradictions, a compassionate protector within his community, yet merciless in dealings with rivals. He maintained a network so subtle the outside world barely glimpsed it. Enzo longs to know more. There is a sense that Vittorio left behind undiscovered secrets, small fragments he tucked away like hidden jewels, waiting for someone brave and patient enough to find them. Inside the villa's vast library, candlelight flickers across rows of leather-bound ledgers and dusty volumes. Enzo approaches a narrow, almost hidden alcove. This is where Vittorio stashed his most private records, letters written in cipher, faded photographs, and slender, creased notes passed between trusted lieutenants. He lifts one such letter carefully, reading lines that hint at alliances made and broken decades ago. The script is elegant, but the sentiments within are sharp, gratitude mixed with threat, loyalty laced with warning. Enzo realizes that Vittorio spoke in veiled poetry, a code that reveals truth only to those who understand the rhythms of secrecy. As he deciphers, the villa's portrait gallery seems to watch him. Faces from generations stare back, Don Vittorio in his dark suit, flanked by stern but loyal lieutenants. Near him, Vittorio's godson Matteo, whose eyes betray hope, ambition, and something else darker. Enzo senses Matteo's gaze follows him even now, challenging him to dig deeper. The letters confirm what the portraits imply. Matteo had ambitions Fiora never knew, dreams that flared brightly then vanished like ghosts. Enzo continues reading the records and hears for the first time a faint knock on the heavy wooden door. He sets the letters down, heart quickening but face calm. The door creaks as Grazia, the villa's caretaker, enters quietly. She holds a small, weathered leather pouch. From Vittorio, she whispers. The pouch contains a silver cufflink engraved with the Familia's sigil and a single shimmering black pearl. Enzo realizes this is a key, a token meant to open the vault beneath the chapel's stone floor. Vittorio never intended him to stumble upon these things. He planned, hoped, that his successor would find these at the right moment. Under a sky heavy with stars, Enzo walks through whispering olives to the ancient chapel. A cold ribbon of air wraps around him. When he kneels before the altar and places the cufflink in a hidden recess by candlelight, a gentle click echoes. He finds the floor panel shifts. Beneath it sits an iron-bound chest. His fingers tremble, not with fear but with realization. Here lies the heart of Vittorio's secrets. Inside the chest, rolls of parchment, each inscribed with names, dates, and transactions. Some detail covert aid to poor farmers in Gela, discreet funding of local schools, all acts of benevolence cloaked in silence. Others, more chilling, describe eliminations of enemies, coded praise for silence, instructions to erase trails. Enzo senses a duality that's almost orchestral. Charity and violence, light and shadow, both essential to the family's survival. He picks up one parchment describing a pact forged in 1953 between Don Vittorio and powerful figures in Rome, men of influence. The words are careful, formal yet trembling beneath their decorum is cold caution. Should one side stray, blood will be shed. It's a binding treaty, and Enzo knows its implications. In modern times, some families have forgotten the pact, stepping into the spotlight and losing discretion. Vittorio, in contrast, maintained it with reverence. It's clear preserving the famiglia's integrity was not just about power, it was a sacred vow. And to break that vow would bring not just downfall, but a reckoning centuries in the making. Enzo lights a taper and studies the black pearl. It seems to swallow the flame's glow. He feels his pulse align with the low murmur of history. He realizes that Vittorio didn't only send money and promised loyalty, he built an architecture of shadows and light. This pearl is more than ornament. It's the silent totem of the famiglia's soul, dark, deep, and reflective. A distant church bell tolls midnight, and Enzo understands the burden that rests upon him. He must choose, reveal these secrets to the modern world, a move that could topple corrupt alliances or bury them once more, preserving stability but risking stagnation. His decision will shape the future, not only of his family but of every soul tied to its legacy. He closes the chest and arranges the parchments back inside, eyes steady, heart bold. When he closes the vault, the chapel returns to its hush. Outside, the olive trees shimmer in the moonlight, whispering ancient lullabies. Enzo steps outside and gazes upward, the pearl in his pocket warming against his side. He envisions tomorrow, first light, first steps into a new chapter. With quiet resolve, he returns to the villa, mind alive with history's echo. The morning broke with a soft drizzle, casting a silvery veil over the terracotta roofs of Palermo. The streets, narrow and winding as the thoughts threading through Enzo's mind, glistened faintly under the muted sun. From the balcony of his chamber, Enzo watched raindrops slide along wrought iron rails, their silent descent echoing the quiet shift within his heart. Today, the path laid before him felt less like a choice and more like a summons, gentle yet inexorable. He descended the marble staircase, his footsteps absorbed by the villa's hush. Grazia, as always, awaited him by the main door, a simple nod passing between them. In her gaze he read a silent acknowledgement. Whatever secrets he had unearthed beneath the chapel, they now lived within him, shaping him into something beyond a mere heir. Enzo walked into the courtyard where the scent of damp earth mingled with orange blossoms. At its center stood Matteo's son, Lorenzo, a young man whose presence seemed as delicate and inscrutable as a half-formed shadow. Lorenzo had arrived unannounced at dawn, silent as a ghost, his eyes betraying both curiosity and suspicion. They exchanged few words, yet Enzo sensed an unspoken accord. Both sought to understand the legacy left in their blood, though perhaps with different ends in mind. They sat together beneath a pergola veiled in grapevines, the soft patter of rain a gentle companion to their silence. Enzo began softly, his voice steady as a slow-turning river. "I have seen things our fathers meant for us never to see," he murmured, "hidden truths that do not bind us, but rather reveal what chains us." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "And will you reveal them to the world?" he asked, his voice as low as a whispered oath. Enzo studied him, seeing not Matteo's cold ambition, but a restless hunger for something deeper, perhaps understanding, perhaps absolution. He shook his head gently. "The world craves spectacle, not truth. What I hold, it belongs to a quieter realm, one we must navigate with care." The rain softened, a thin mist rising as the morning sun pressed against thinning clouds. They sat in silence until Lorenzo spoke again, his voice quieter. "Why tell me?" Enzo reached into his coat and placed the black pearl on the table between them. It gleamed darkly against the wet wood, absorbing rather than reflecting light. "Because you are the only one left who bears the blood of both our lines. You stand between past and future." Lorenzo stared at the pearl, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he whispered, "And what do you want of me?" Enzo's answer came softly, but with the weight of generations behind it. To watch with me, to listen, and to remember that we serve not only ourselves but a legacy that stretches beyond death. This is not a crown. It is a burden we must choose to carry or cast away. They remained there, the pearl between them, as the morning unfolded. Around them, the villa seemed to hold its breath, stone walls heavy with the echoes of unseen eyes and unheard voices. Enzo felt the faintest ripple, an ancient rhythm stirring beneath their feet in the earth of Sicily itself. By midday, the rain had passed, leaving the sky washed clean, a tender shade of pale blue. Enzo walked alone through the olive groves that bordered the estate, each gnarled tree whispering softly in the breeze. His thoughts turned to the parchments hidden once more beneath the chapel's floorboards. The knowledge they held, the intricate web of loyalties, betrayals, and silent pacts, was alive, a living memory of the Sicilian underworld's shadowed heart. He wondered if Vittorio had once walked this same path, burdened by the same questions. Did his great-uncle feel this quiet dread, this solemn reverence for the thin line they walked between power and ruin? Or had time dulled the weight, leaving only a hardened acceptance? Enzo felt neither hardened nor fearful. Instead, he felt anchored, a strange calm taking root within him. At the grove's edge, he met a man waiting beneath a cypress tree. Older, dressed in simple clothes but with eyes sharp as flint. This was Salvatore, once a trusted confidant of Vittorio, now a living relic of a world fading into shadow. They greeted each other with a silent nod. The language of men who understood words were often a luxury they could not afford. "You have seen the chest," Salvatore said quietly, not as a question but a fact. Enzo inclined his head. "I have." Salvatore's eyes searched his face. "And what will you do?" The answer was as gentle as the sighing wind. "I will watch. I will learn. I will not rush to pull threads I do not yet understand." A faint smile touched the old man's lips, a rare, fleeting thing. "Then you are wiser than most who have held this weight." His gaze softened. "And you will need that wisdom, for not all who come to you will bear good intentions." They spoke little after that. Salvatore's presence was less a conversation than a living reminder of the world Enzo now stood within. They parted without ceremony, Enzo turning back toward the villa as the sun began its slow descent into afternoon. The day faded gently, leaving a hush that stretched from sky to sea. Enzo sat once more in the library, the black pearl resting upon the map-strewn desk. He traced his fingers over the worn lines of Sicily's coast, over names long whispered in shadow, some forgotten, some immortalized in the blood of the land. He did not yet know the shape of what lay ahead, but he felt its quiet pull, a silent undertow calling him toward a deeper understanding. The Sicilian Mafia's secrets were more than power plays and whispered threats. They were echoes of a world built on fragile pacts and silent compacts. A world that asked not for dominion, but for careful guardianship of a story woven in shadow and silence. And so the night embraced Palermo once more, wrapping the villa and its sleeping truths in a velvet hush. Enzo remained in his study, eyes wide to the dark, mind alive with visions of what had been and what quietly stirred in the long shadows of the ancient Sicilian heart. Part 21. The sky over Palermo carried a softer hue that evening, a veil of muted lavender and deepening grey, as though the heavens themselves understood the hush that had settled upon the old villa. Inside its age-worn walls, the heart of a legacy pulsed quietly, hidden beneath layers of stone, history, and the whispered vows of men long passed into shadow. Enzo sat alone in the library, the black pearl resting like a silent sentinel before him, its dark luster absorbing the flickering glow of the fireplace. The weight of the previous days pressed upon his shoulders, yet not with the heaviness of dread. Instead, it felt like a mantle, an inheritance not sought but embraced with the quiet courage of one who understands the currents of the unseen world. He opened one of the ancient ledgers once more, its pages soft with age yet sharp with implication. Names flowed across the parchment like quiet echoes, men who had sworn oaths in blood and silence, alliances forged not in the open but in shadows where words hung heavier than steel. Yet tonight Enzo's gaze rested not on these written lines, but on a single name written in a hand unfamiliar to him. Emilia. No surname, no title, just Emilia, etched in an elegant scrawl beside a date nearly 50 years old. and beneath it a phrase in Latin, in silentio regnum, in silence the kingdom. His breath caught softly, as if the room itself leaned closer in anticipation. Who was Emilia? The ledgers told of men, patriarchs, lieutenants, informants, rivals, but never had a woman's name surfaced among these guarded records. The rarity of it alone set Enzo's mind adrift in wondering. He traced the ink gently with his fingertip, a silent inquiry passing between him and the silent parchment. Emilia's name appeared again in a separate volume, linked with a date and a simple, enigmatic note, the keeper of the true debt. Questions whispered through his mind like distant wind stirring dry leaves. What debt? And how did a woman, a silent figure obscured by the veil of decades, come to hold such a title among men who traded in shadows and silence? The night pressed closer around him, yet the soft crackle of the fireplace wrapped the library in a cocoon of warmth. Enzo closed the ledgers softly and rose, the black pearl tucked once more into the inner pocket of his coat. His steps were slow, deliberate, as he moved through the silent corridors of the villa. His destination lay not beneath the chapel, nor within the hidden vaults, but in the northern wing of the estate, untouched for decades. This wing had been Vittorio's private domain, shuttered after his passing. Grazia had kept its keys in a carved wooden box, untouched by dust or time. When Enzo approached her earlier that day, she gave them to him without a word, her eyes steady with unspoken trust. Now, standing before the heavy oak door of Vittorio's private chambers, Enzo hesitated only for a breath. The key slid smoothly into the lock, a testament to the care with which this house was kept, and the door opened with a soft sigh, as though it too welcomed his entry. Inside, the chamber was unlike the rest of the villa. The walls were lined not with portraits of ancestors or gilded mirrors, but with maps. Ancient, hand-drawn, many bearing strange markings and cryptic annotations in faded ink. A single chair rested by a window half-draped in sheer lace, a low table beside it bearing a solitary object, a leather-bound journal. Enzo crossed the room with quiet reverence, the air within the chamber thick with the scent of old paper, cedar and lavender. He lifted the journal, feeling the fine grain of the leather beneath his fingers. The initials EL were pressed into its cover, small, almost hidden. As he opened it, the world around him seemed to still. The pages spoke with a voice different from the ledgers, softer, more intimate, yet no less powerful. Emilia's voice. The entries flowed in a hand that combined grace with purpose. They spoke of a world few dared to imagine, of silent interventions, whispered warnings delivered before violence erupted, debts called in with a single glance from behind a veil. Emilia had been more than an informant. She had been a silent architect, a weaver of the unseen alliances that kept families from falling into ruinous bloodshed. Where men forged pacts with swords and threats, Emilia had sealed them with a word, a whisper, a gesture, unseen. Her strength lay not in overt power, but in the gentle yet unbreakable web she spun among those too blinded by ambition to see the threads. Enzo read, spellbound, as Emilia's entries spoke of Don Vittorio, not as a patriarch but as a confidant, perhaps even a kindred spirit. Together they had shaped the fragile peace that held between rival families during the bloodiest years. Yet her name was never spoken in public, her role a secret known only to a few. The true debt, the one hinted at in the ledger, wasn't of money or blood, but of silence. Emilia had given the famiglia a legacy of survival through restraint, a whispered wisdom that held equal weight to the sharpest blade. He turned page after page until a final entry caught his breath, a passage written in a hand that seemed almost to tremble upon the page. To those who find these words after I am gone, know that strength lies not in the force of arms, nor in the shadow of fear, but in the quiet understanding of hearts. If you hold this journal, you are the keeper now. Watch the world with open eyes and a silent heart, for it is in silence that kingdoms endure. The flickering lamplight made the ink seem to shimmer softly, as though the words themselves breathed. Enzo closed the journal with a reverent calm. He stood for a long moment in the silent chamber, the quiet thrum of the past mingling with the steady beat of his heart. In this woman he had never met, he saw a reflection of the path he felt himself drawn to, a way of leading not with iron, but with understanding, not with fear, but with a quiet presence that allowed strength to grow unseen. He walked back through the villa as the night deepened, the journal pressed close against his heart. Above him, the ancient rafters whispered their soft wooden sighs. Behind him, the shadows of history watched, not with judgment, but with the silent hope of those who understand that some legacies are meant to be born gently, like a flame in the dark. And beneath the wide Sicilian sky, the pearl of shadow, both the one in his pocket and the one within his heart, rested quietly, awaiting the dawn. Part 22. Dawn arrived with a hush upon the Sicilian hills, casting a soft glow over the awakening vineyards and olive groves. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of lavender and rain-washed earth. In the quietude of that fragile morning, Enzo walked alone toward the old stone chapel at the edge of the estate, the place where so much had begun, and perhaps where it must find its quiet conclusion. The journal rested in his coat, its weight delicate yet profound against his side. In his hand he held the black pearl, its silent gleam undiminished by the pale morning light. Each step he took across the dew-laden grass seemed to echo faintly, as if the land itself acknowledged his pilgrimage. The chapel door yielded with a soft sigh, revealing the familiar hush of stone and shadow within. Candles flickered gently upon the worn altar, their flames small but steadfast. Enzo approached slowly, his heart calm. Not with the certainty of a man who believes he holds all answers, but with the peace of one who has accepted that some questions are not meant to be solved, only carried. He knelt before the altar, placing both the journal and the black pearl upon its surface. For a long moment he simply gazed at them, symbols of a legacy woven in silence, restraint and unspoken strength. The chapel remained still, the air wrapped in the soft hum of ancient prayers lingering in the stones. Enzo's thoughts wandered to Vittorio and Emilia, two souls who had understood the delicate balance of power, who had shaped destinies not through open command, but through whispered counsel and measured silence. Their choices had preserved lives, shielded families, and forged a fragile peace in a world prone to chaos. They had understood that true power was not loud nor ruthless, but subtle, an art of presence, a mastery of restraint. And now, in this quiet hour, that legacy passed into his hands. But Enzo felt no triumph, no rise of ambition. What stirred within him was something quieter, a sense of guardianship, a vow to protect not the empire nor its hidden wealth, but the spirit of discretion and silent strength that had carried his ancestors through centuries of peril. His hand closed gently over the pearl, the cool smoothness grounding him in the moment. He whispered softly, words meant only for the silent stones and unseen watchers of the chapel. I will not chase power. I will not command by fear. I will watch, listen, and preserve what must endure. And when my time comes, I will pass this on, not with chains, but with trust. The words lingered softly in the chapel's hush, as though embraced by unseen witnesses. He rose with quiet resolve, placing the journal within a hidden recess behind the altar, a small chamber known only to those entrusted by Vittorio himself. The black pearl he returned to his pocket, not as a symbol of dominance, but as a quiet reminder of the responsibility he now bore. As Enzo stepped into the gentle light of morning, the world beyond the chapel seemed to exhale. The villa in the distance, the fields stretching toward the sea, the ancient olive trees whispering in the breeze, all seemed to acknowledge his choice with a silent nod. In the days that followed, Enzo made no grand proclamations. There were no bold declarations of leadership, no ostentatious displays of power. Instead, he moved with quiet purpose among the people of Palermo, visiting old friends, offering help to those in need, listening more than he spoke. His presence became a steady, unseen thread woven gently into the fabric of the city's life. Word spread as it always did, though not with the clangor of gossip or fear. Rather, it moved like a soft undercurrent, a tale of a man who carried the weight of his family's legacy with humility and grace. Those who sought him found a calm voice, a discerning ear, and a heart unwilling to be swayed by greed or rashness. And so, a new chapter quietly unfolded in Palermo's long and tangled history. The old alliances, long strained by ambition and rivalry, found in Enzo a silent mediator, a man who did not command but guided, who did not rule but stood watchful at the crossroads where shadows met light. The lessons of Vittorio and Emilia lived on, not through edicts or decrees, but through the quiet choices Enzo made each day. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the Sicilian hills, Enzo stood once more on the villa's terrace. Lorenzo joined him, the younger man's gaze steady yet softened by understanding. They shared no words. None were needed. The bond between them had grown in the silent spaces of shared responsibility and quiet trust. Together, they watched the sun cast its final golden threads across the sea, the sky alight with soft amber hues. The world before them stretched wide and open, a living tapestry of shadows and light, history and hope. And in that quiet moment, Enzo felt a deep, abiding peace. He understood now that the hidden secrets of the Sicilian Mafia were not merely the whispered deals, the shadowed alliances, or the power brokered in silence. They were the unseen hands that guided when others faltered, the quiet hearts that protected when others sought to destroy, the whispered wisdom that endured long after empires fell. In silence, they had ruled, and in silence, they would endure. The night embraced the villa once more, soft and eternal. And within its ancient walls, beneath its whispering eaves and quiet stones, a legacy of quiet strength settled gently into the heart of Sicily, unseen, unsung, yet forever alive in the spaces where shadows met the dawn.